Tonight's stories are calm and easy to listen to, told slowly beneath the sound of steady rain. There's a gentle darkness here, familiar and unhurried. Everything continues quietly if you drift off. Story 1, Relentless Rig Pursuit, Haunting Highway Stalker. The highway was a ribbon of gray stretching into the heat haze, and the sun had just begun its slow slide behind the distant ridges. But then I noticed the truck. At first, it was just a flash in the rearview mirror, an old rig, rusty and faded, its paint chipped down to bare metal in places. Nothing special, really. Plenty of trucks on the road. But there was something about it that didn't sit right. It wasn't the kind of rig that changed lanes or sped past you, weaving in and out like most drivers did. No, this one kept its distance, close enough to be unnerving, far enough to avoid confrontation. It followed, steady and silent. I blinked, squinting in the glare off the windshield, but it didn't disappear. Still there. Behind me. For the next exit, and the next one after that. Each time I veered off, thinking maybe it was just coincidence, there it was, lumbering along behind me like a shadow glued to my tail. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was being paranoid. It's just a trucker, I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck where cold sweat had started. But the driver never changed lanes. Never blinked. Or maybe I imagined that part. I'm not sure. It was the way the rig mirrored every turn I made, the way it stayed perfectly aligned with my speed, as if it had no place else to be. I pulled into a rest stop, heart thudding too loud in my ears. The sun was setting fast, and the sky shifted from orange to a bruised purple. There was a faint smell of gasoline and hot tar. The air was dry but carried a strange metallic tang that I couldn't place. I turned to look out the window, hoping the truck would be gone. But it wasn't. The rig sat in the next lane over, engines idling with a low rumble. The driver's window was open slightly, but I couldn't see the man's face. It was obscured by shadow, and the cab was cluttered with a mess of clothes, empty coffee cups, and what looked like a faded baseball cap. The truck's rust looked even worse up close, flaking, scarred, like it had survived more than just long miles. I caught my reflection in the glass and noticed my hands trembling. I cleared my throat and forced myself to step out into the cooling evening air. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few tired cars and a couple of distant figures moving toward the restroom. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead flickered unevenly, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. I walked toward the small convenience store, trying to shake a growing sense of something unease. Dread? I wasn't sure. I told myself it was just the long hours behind the wheel, the dryness in my throat, maybe the loneliness settling in. Yet, every time I glanced back, the truck stayed put, engine humming, driver unmoving. Inside, the store smelled of stale coffee, cheap snacks, and a hint of cleaning chemicals. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gave me a polite nod when I asked for a bottle of water. I noticed a small stack of local newspapers behind the counter, headlines about rising temperatures and traffic accidents on this stretch of highway. Normal stuff, I thought. I bought the water, paid in exact change, and stepped back outside. The sun was gone now, swallowed by the horizon, and the sky had deepened into a navy blue dotted with the first stars. The air cooled quickly, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. The truck was still there. I watched it for a moment, heart knocking against my ribs. The driver didn't move. Not a blink, not a shift in posture. Just sat there, staring forward, engine idling like a beast waiting for its prey. I could almost hear the silence between us, thick and heavy. I forced myself to look away and walk back to my car. As I slid into the driver's seat, the radio picked up a faint static, then a crackle, then a soft voice reading the weather report. I turned it off. The rig started to roll just as I did, and I merged onto the highway again. The road stretched out under the moonlight, smooth and unending. Every mile marker ticked by, and I couldn't help but glance in the mirror. There it was. Following. The night air smelled cooler now, mixed with the faint scent of diesel and dust. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter. I told myself I was imagining things, that the driver was probably just on the same route, bored or tired. Still, the feeling in my stomach twisted tighter. I thought about making a call, but my phone had a weak signal, and the battery was low. No way to ask for help, no one to tell that I might be followed by a stranger who didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't change lanes. Just kept pace like some silent shadow. The highway lights passed, one after the other, and the rig stayed behind me, steady as ever. I wondered how long I could keep this up. How long the road would stretch before I could lose it or before it caught up. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. Every exit seemed miles away, every turn a gamble. The air inside the car felt thick, each breath shallow and quick. Then, up ahead, a flicker of hope or rest stop sign, glowing faintly. Could I make it there before the rig closed the distance? I floored it, heart pounding as the tires screamed against the asphalt. I slammed the brakes just past the dim glow of the rest stop sign and skidded onto the gravel, the tires kicking up dust that tasted bitter in my mouth. I killed the engine and sat frozen, the sudden silence inside the car almost suffocating. Outside, the buzz of the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming unevenly. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, a sharp, lonely sound that made my skin crawl. The night air was cool against my flushed face, smelling faintly of diesel and wet asphalt. It hit me then, how close I was to panic, how my hands trembled even though I was trying to steady my breath. I fumbled with my phone, the screen dim and stubborn. 1 bar. Not enough to call anyone, not that I was sure who I'd say this to without sounding like I'd lost my mind. I stared at the rig's cab through the windshield, the silhouette of the driver unmoving, hands steady on the wheel, staring straight ahead. No blink. No shift. Just that slow, relentless presence. I tried to convince myself this was some kind of weird coincidence, that the driver was just following the same route, maybe a night shift trucker with nothing else to do but trail behind another vehicle. But even as I told myself that, my gut twisted tighter. Something was off. The way the rig matched every turn I took, the way it never left my side. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The air smelled colder here, sharper. My legs felt unsteady. I scanned the area, empty picnic tables with peeling paint, a trash bin overflowing with old coffee cups and stale crumbs. A flickering neon sign for the restroom buzzed overhead. The place was deserted except for the rig, parked just a few yards behind me. "Hey," I called out, voice cracking. "You lost or something?" No response. Just the faint rumble of the idling engine, like a heartbeat. I shivered and stepped back into the car, locking the doors with a click that sounded louder than it should. The rig stayed put, driver still staring ahead, like a statue carved from rust and cold metal. I tried the radio. Static. No stations, just that high-pitched hiss. I clicked through the presets, hoping for something, anything, to break the silence, but nothing came. Then I noticed it. The rig's license plate was half covered in grime, but the numbers were there, smeared in a way that made them hard to read. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to make out the digits clearly. The letters looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. Why would I know that plate? It made no sense. Maybe I was just tired. I pulled out my notebook from the glove compartment. I'd scribbled down the plate number earlier, when I thought I'd caught a glimpse. The numbers matched the dirty plate perfectly. A cold shiver slid down my spine. I wasn't making this up. Suddenly, The rig's headlights flicked off. Just for a second. Enough to make me jerk back from the windshield. Then they clicked back on, steady and bright. My heart hammered. Was that some kind of signal? An attempt to scare me? Or was I just seeing things? I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard. The driver's face was still hidden in shadow, but I could swear his head tilted just slightly toward me. I swallowed hard and decided I had to move. I started the car, the engine groaning to life, and pulled back onto the highway. The rig followed immediately, its headlights a dull glow behind me, unwavering. I tried to shake it. Every exit I took, the rest stop, a tiny diner, even a gas station with a flickering sign, the rig appeared again, like a bad penny. Always behind, always watching. I pulled into the diner parking lot, the scent of frying bacon and burnt coffee briefly filling the car as I rolled down the windows. Inside, the place was nearly empty, save for a tired waitress wiping down tables and a man in a baseball cap nursing a cup of black coffee in the corner. I sat for a long time, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes locked on the windows. The rig was parked across the street, headlights off, engine silent. I tried to talk to the waitress, hesitating before blurting out, "Have you seen that rig before? The one with the rust all over it?" She glanced out, then shook her head. "Can't say I have. Around here, trucks come and go. Nothing special." I wanted to ask more, but my voice caught in my throat. Was she hiding something? Was I just being paranoid? I scribbled the plate number again, trying to make sense of it all. Back in the car, I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think. I called my sister, hoping to talk to someone normal, someone who could remind me this was just a long night and a strange coincidence. The phone rang twice, then cut off. No voicemail. I was alone. The rig's headlights snapped on again as I pulled out, trailing me like a shadow that refused to fall away. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of the driver's face, pale, expressionless, eyes fixed on the road ahead. No blink. No turn. No hint of humanity. I slammed my fist on the wheel. "Why won't you leave me alone?" No answer. Just the steady hum of the highway, the rig inching closer. I realized then that this wasn't just about a ride. It was a message. Or a warning. But what? The night stretched on, every mile heavier than the last. I forced myself to stay alert, scanning every dark corner, every empty ramp. The rig was there, patient, relentless. I thought about stopping again, maybe calling the police or flagging down a passing car. But the thought of stepping out of my own vehicle into the night, with that rig waiting just behind, it made my stomach turn. Instead, I decided to keep moving. Keep driving. Maybe dawn would bring clarity. Or at least it would bring other people. As I merged onto a deserted stretch of highway, headlights glaring in the mirror, I realized I had no plan beyond that. No idea what this driver wanted. No idea how to lose him. Just one thing certain, this was no accident. The rig was here for me. And it wasn't going anywhere. The night thickened around me like a wet blanket. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 2:30 in the morning. No gas stations for miles, no towns, just a ribbon of cracked asphalt and the occasional dead tree silhouette. The cold air vented through the cracked window, smelling faintly of burnt rubber and pine. The scent was oddly comforting, but that didn't stop my skin from crawling. I tried to think it through. Why me? Why this highway? The truck had been behind me since the state line, caught me like a shadow. I remembered the sign I'd passed hours ago, the one that said next exit 35 miles. 35 miles of nowhere, no place to hide, no friendly faces. I swallowed hard and pulled the wheel slightly to the right, then left, testing the rig's reaction. It moved in perfect sync, like a predator circling its prey. No flashing lights, no horn, no signal. Just that relentless, slow crawl behind me. I felt trapped in a loop. My phone buzzed. A message. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled for it, heart thudding. "Are you okay?" It was from Jenna, my sister. She'd been calling for hours, probably worried. I typed back quickly, still driving. "Someone behind me. Keeps following." No reply. I stared at the screen, the glow illuminating my sweat-damp face. Then, a flicker in the mirror caught my eye. The truck's driver was visible now, at least partially. Pale face, eyes fixed dead ahead, not even a blink. It was like watching a statue. The kind of stare that didn't just watch but owned you. The realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't random. This wasn't some bored trucker or late-night highway wanderer. It was intentional. Methodical. I thought about calling the police again, but last time, the dispatcher had sounded skeptical. "Highway patrol's busy tonight." "You sure it's not just another trucker?" And I didn't blame them. Without concrete proof, I was just some nervous driver on a lonely road. I took a deep breath and forced my eyes back on the road. The rig followed every exit I passed, every detour I took, as if the driver had memorized my route. I tried to speed up, but the truck matched me, almost effortlessly. Slowing down didn't help either. It stayed glued behind me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I considered stopping again. Maybe at the next rest area. But the thought of stepping outside, of turning my back on the wheel in that unblinking gaze, made my stomach flip. I could almost feel the heat of those eyes on my neck, even in the cold night. So I kept going. After what felt like endless miles under the buzzing street lamps, I saw a sign, "Welcome to Crestwood." A small town, maybe a chance for help. Relief washed over me, sharp and sudden. Maybe other cars, maybe people awake. I slowed as I entered the town limits, but the rig stayed back, just outside the glow of the streetlights. It didn't enter the town. It just waited. Like a wolf at the edge of the forest. I pulled into a 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon that hummed in the quiet night. Inside, the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon lapped around me, a stark contrast to the sterile highway air. The bell above the door jingled, and a tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "Long night, huh?" she said, voice low but steady. I nodded, sliding into a booth by the window. My fingers tapped the Formica table nervously. "You don't see many trucks around here at this hour." She shrugged. "Truckers usually stick to the bypass, avoid the town. Not many places to pull over here." I glanced out. The rig was parked just beyond the diner's neon halo, its engine silent, but the driver visible through the windshield, sitting motionless. "See that rig?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The waitress's eyes narrowed. "Yeah. That's old man Harker's truck. He's been driving that rust bucket for decades, but he's been off the road since last summer. No one's seen him in months." That didn't make sense. The man behind the wheel hadn't blinked once. He looked alive enough. But the waitress's words sent a cold rush through me. How was his truck out here? How was he driving if he wasn't supposed to be on the road? "Maybe someone else is driving it," I muttered, more to myself. She shook her head. "No one else has got the keys. He's a stubborn one, don't like help. But he's been missing since July." I stared out at the shadowed truck. The engine's faint hum filled the silence between us. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The air smelled faintly of rain and something metallic, like blood and rust. I realized then that the rig wasn't just following me. It was waiting for me to make a move. I checked the clock again. 3 a.m. somewhere far away, dawn was still hours off. The rig's headlights blinked once, like a slow, deliberate pulse. I imagined the driver's face again, that pale, unblinking stare. The waitress cleared her throat. "You should get some rest. No use driving yourself to the ground." I shook my head. "I can't stop. Not with that thing out there." She glanced toward the window. "You ever hear about the old highway? The one that runs parallel to this road? They say it was closed years ago after some accident. Nobody takes it anymore." I frowned. "Why?" She shrugged. "Nothing official. Just a lot of stories. The kind that keep people away." I pulled out my phone and searched. The old highway. Closed indefinitely. Accidents. Nothing recent. But as I scrolled, I found one detail that made my jaw tighten. The old highway ran close behind Crestwood, and the rig had been spotted along it, sometimes just out of sight, sometimes right on the edge of the pavement. I looked up. The truck's headlights vanished from the diner window. My breath caught. "Where'd it go?" I whispered. The waitress's eyes were wide. "I don't know," she said. "But if you're thinking of using that old highway, you should be careful." I nodded, heart pounding, because I knew then that I had crossed a line. There was no turning back, no safe exit. That rig wasn't just chasing me, it was corralling me, herding me towards something I couldn't yet see. I finished my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me, and stepped outside. The night was quieter now, the rig nowhere in sight. I sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling slightly, and punched the GPS coordinates for the old highway into the console. My fingers hovered over the dashboard. I had to choose. Back. Or forward. There was no escaping that rig. No matter what I did, it was out there, waiting. I started the engine and turned onto the old highway. The night air folded around me like a wet blanket as I stepped back outside the diner. The bitter tang of stale coffee still lingered on my tongue, but it was the silence that pressed hardest against my ears. No rumble of engines. No crunch of tires on gravel. Just the slow, steady pulse of my own breathing. The rig was gone, or at least I thought so. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, the fabric rough against my skin, and scanned the empty stretch of highway that cut through Crestwood like a scar. The streetlights flickered erratically, bathing everything in that sickly orange glow, the kind that makes shadows longer and faces stranger. I wanted to believe the truck had vanished, that the whole thing was some twisted trick my mind was playing after hours of driving and staring at the same rusty rig. But I knew better. The waitress's words echoed in my head. "If you're thinking of using that old highway, you should be careful." I had no choice. That road was the only way forward, the only thread left in this tangled mess. I crossed a line, all right, but turning back felt like walking into a trap with no escape. I slid back into the driver's seat, the vinyl cold and cracked beneath me. The engine sputtered to life, the filling the cramped space. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Empty. For now. The first few miles were a blur of dark trees and broken pavement. The old highway was narrow, the paint faded and cracked, like it hadn't seen a proper coat of maintenance in decades. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves seeped through the cracked window. I kept my eyes darting, searching for any sign of the rig's headlights, the telltale red glow that had haunted me for hours. Then, just as I rounded a bend, the rig's massive shape emerged from behind a copse of trees, its rusted frame looming like a specter in the moonlight. No blinking lights, no change in speed. It matched me mile for mile, an unyielding shadow that felt less like a vehicle and more like a presence. I swallowed hard. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought about the waitress's stories, the accidents on this road, how they were all hushed up, the way the police never seemed to find anything, the way the rig was spotted but never caught. Was this driver some kind of predator? Or just a man with a death wish, dragging others down with him? The thought sent a shiver racing down my spine, and I blinked against the sudden sting in my eyes. I forced myself to focus, to keep the wheel steady. The rig's headlight stayed locked on me, unwavering, like the driver was daring me to make a move. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a second skin. Ahead, a small sign marked an exit for a town called Harper's Glen. I hit the blinker without hesitation, desperate for any semblance of safety. The rig did the same. No hesitation. No deviation. It followed me off the highway, its engine growling low and steady. My pulse hammered in my ears as I drove through the deserted streets of Harper's Glen, the cracked sidewalks and shuttered storefronts whispering of abandonment. The air smelled faintly of mildew and rust, a metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. I pulled into a gas station, the flickering neon sign buzzing overhead. The rig stopped just beyond the pumps, its cab dark and still. I stepped out, and the air was thick with tension, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting sharp shadows on the linoleum floor. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and wary eyes, looked up as I entered. "Long way from anywhere," he said, voice low, almost cautious. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You see that truck out there? The rusty rig?" He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "That one's been prowling these parts for years. Folks call it the shadow rig. No one knows who drives it, but it shows up when you least want it." "Why?" I asked, feeling the weight of my own desperation slip out in my words. He shrugged, eyes flicking toward the window. "Some say it's a ghost story, but those who've had run-ins, well, they don't forget. It's like it's searching for something or someone." I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Searching for me? For what? I glanced back outside, toward the rig's dark silhouette waving patiently under the flickering gas pumps. "Do you think it's dangerous?" My voice barely carried. He looked me dead in the eye. "Dangerous? Depends on what you mean. It doesn't chase to kill. Not like that. But it doesn't let go. It corners you. Makes you doubt yourself. Makes you feel like you're losing your mind." I swallowed hard, the cold sweat prickling at my neck. "I think it's doing exactly that." The attendant gave me a look that was part sympathy, part warning. "If you're headed down that old highway again, be ready. It'll test you. Push you to your limits." I nodded, thanking him and stepping back outside. The rig's engine rumbled softly now, almost like a heartbeat in the dark. I climbed back in, the driver's seat suddenly feeling smaller, the air heavier. I started the engine and pulled away from the station, the rig falling in behind me like a shadow refusing to be shaken. As I drove on, the road narrowed, the trees closing in tighter on either side. The headlights of the rig never wavered, never blinked, never faltered. It was patient. Enduring. Somewhere between stubborn and sinister. I tried talking aloud, hoping the sound of my voice might cut through the thick silence. "Why are you following me? What do you want?" The words felt ridiculous, whispered into the night like a plea to an indifferent god. Silence. Complete silence. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My eyelids grew heavy, the exhaustion clawing at the edges of my mind. The empty stretch of highway ahead blurred in the heat haze as the sun dropped low behind the hills. The rig sat there again, just past the curve, occupying the right lane like a stubborn shadow. I squinted through the windshield, trying to make out the driver's face in the cab, but there was nothing but a silhouette, unmoving, like a statue carved from rust and peeling paint. Hours, maybe more, had passed with that truck exactly where it was now, 50 yards behind me, never blinking, never shifting lanes, never giving any sign that the driver was human. I pulled off at the next exit, heart drumming loud enough to drown out the hum of my car. Just to be sure. The truck followed without hesitation, merging onto the same exit ramp with mechanical precision. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the knuckles blanched white. I swallowed hard, tasting the grit of dust and stale coffee in my mouth. Okay, I muttered under my breath. You're not real. You're just a truck. But the way those headlights caught the cracked asphalt in a steady, unblinking stare felt like something else. Something deliberate. I thought about calling the police, but what could I say? There's a truck following me, driver won't blink. They'd laugh or hang up. Besides, I was miles from anything, not even a gas station in sight. My phone had a single bar, barely enough to send a text, let alone get help. The silence of the desert at dusk pressed against my windows, thick and suffocating. I tried to remember the last time I blinked. Odd how something so automatic could feel like a luxury now. My eyes burned. The world narrowed down to the cracked lines on the road, the fading light, and that damn truck like a constant, cold heartbeat behind me. I slowed down, hoping to lose it in the cluster of roadside motels ahead, but it slowed too. No hesitation, no change. Just that hulking form, like a beast that knew no exhaustion. I took another exit, then another, zigzagging through the maze of old highways. Each time, the rig was right there waiting, patient, relentless. I pulled into a diner parking lot, the neon open sign buzzing softly above the door. The smell hit me first, the sharp tang of frying oil mixed with burnt coffee and old vinyl booths. I stepped out, legs stiff, and looked over my shoulder. The rig was parked across the street, engine off, headlights dark. For the first time, it wasn't following me. It was waiting. A waitress with a tired smile poured me a cup of coffee when I sat down, no questions asked. The diner hummed with the low chatter of late-night regulars and the clatter of dishes. I stared into my cup, the bitter warmth a small comfort against the cold that had settled in my chest. I kept glancing out the window. No movement from the truck. No driver visible. The silence between breaths was heavy enough to choke on. I wondered if the driver was watching me now, through the darkened cab window. Was he inside? Or was it empty? Had I imagined the whole thing? But the rig had followed every turn, every exit, like a predator locked onto its prey. It had to be someone. A person. Maybe not sane, but definitely human. Rough night? The waitress's voice pulled me back. Her eyes were kind but cautious, like she'd seen more than she wanted to. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She nodded back, wiping her hands on her apron. You're not the first to come in here looking like you've seen a ghost. Folks around here, they talk about that old rig. Says it's been circling the highway for years, always the same one. Never slows, never blinks. Some say it's a ghost story to keep strangers off the road. I wanted to laugh. Wanted to tell her this was no ghost story. But the words stuck in my throat. The idea of a ghost truck was absurd, but the thought of a real person, someone who would drive like that for hours, following a stranger in silence, was far worse. What kind of loneliness or madness did that take? I paid for my coffee and stepped back outside. The night was cooler now, the stars sharper against the black sky. The rig had started up again, its engine a low growl in the distance as it pulled away down the highway. I watched until the taillights disappeared into the night. That night, I slept in the car, the windows cracked just enough for the desert air to crawl in. Every creak of the metal and rustle of the breeze made me jump. But the truck didn't come back. Morning came slow and pale. I felt hollow, drained, but somehow lighter. The nightmare was over, or at least paused. I realized I'd been holding my breath for hours, and when I finally exhaled, it was shaky but real. Back on the road, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those cold headlights again. But the highway stretched out empty, the sun warming the cracked pavement and the miles ahead. I thought about what I'd learned. Sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't about what's in front of you, but what's behind the silence, the waiting, the not knowing. That rig was a reminder. A warning, maybe. Or just a broken man's obsession, driving in circles, chasing something only he understood. I didn't try to understand anymore. I just drove. By the time I reached the city, the weight had lifted enough for me to breathe without flinching. The streets were crowded, noisy, human again. I parked the car and stepped out, the air thick with exhaust and possibility. I met my friends later that day. Their faces were warm, familiar. I told them I was fine, that the trip had been long but worth it. They didn't ask about the truck, and I didn't volunteer. Some stories are better left on the road. That night, lying in a bed that wasn't moving, I let myself close my eyes without fear. I blinked once, twice. The ordinary world felt strange and comforting all at once. And somewhere in the distance, the highway waited. Quiet now. I knew I'd never forget those hours behind the wheel, the way the rig never blinked, never wavered. But I also knew I was still here. Still breathing. Still driving forward. That was enough. Story 2, Room of Recorded Lives, diary tracks every move. The first thing I noticed was the smell. I checked in that afternoon after a long, slow drive through stretches of burnt-out fields and dead grass. I was supposed to be on a break from the city's chaos, just a night or two to clear my head before the next project at work. I told myself I'd keep it simple, no distractions, no surprises. But this place, with its peeling paint and the low hum of the ancient air conditioner rattling in the window, wasn't exactly restful. Still, I'd taken the room for the price and the convenience, nothing more. After dumping my bag on the bed, I decided to freshen up. The bathroom was tiny, the tile cool and rough under my bare feet. I flicked on the light, the buzzing bulb struggling to hold steady, and leaned in closer to the mirror. That's when I saw it, a small gap along the edge where the mirror met the wall, enough to slip a hand behind. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my fingers into the space and felt something smooth and thin slide against my skin. I pulled gently. A folded piece of paper, maybe a small booklet. My pulse quickened, though I told myself it was just curiosity. Nothing more. I unfolded the pages carefully, trying not to crease the fragile sheets. What I found was a diary. At least, I assumed it was a diary. The handwriting was neat, consistent, and meticulous, like someone had taken great pains to document every detail. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. I read the lines slowly, the words painting scenes that were eerily familiar. At first, I thought it was some kind of journal kept by a previous guest, but as I read on, my skin prickled with a growing sense of unease. The diary chronicled moments from this exact room, the creak of the floorboards near the window, the way the bathroom light flickered when the air conditioner kicked on, the faint tapping sound at midnight that I had dismissed as a loose shudder. It was describing my own presence here, right now. I blinked, unsure if I'd misread the dates or the times. but the entries were clear and precise. They recorded not only my movements but my thoughts, the lingering doubt about the place, the way I twisted my ring anxiously every few minutes, even the text messages I'd sent earlier that day. How could anyone have known these things? I hadn't spoken to anyone here yet, and the room felt impossibly isolated. I closed the diary, hands trembling slightly, and pressed my back against the cold tile wall. The hum of the air conditioner sounded louder suddenly, like it was filling the tight space around me. Outside, a dog barked somewhere distant, sharp and lonely. I swallowed hard. Maybe someone was playing a prank. A previous guest with too much time and a twisted sense of humor. But what unsettled me most was that the last entry, written only minutes ago, described exactly what I was doing now, leaning against the bathroom wall, staring at a diary that shouldn't exist. And then, as if to confirm the impossible, I heard a soft rustling from behind the mirror. I didn't move at first. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt colder, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I told myself to be rational, to think it through. Maybe the diary was left by the motel's owner or a former employee. Maybe someone watched this room through hidden cameras or vents. I'd read about places like that, the kind of creepy setups people made for reality shows or worse. Still, the thought that someone could know my private thoughts, things I hadn't shared with a single soul since arriving, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just about privacy anymore. It was about control. Someone was watching, and not just watching. They were inside my head, following me in ways I couldn't explain. I forced myself to stand up, gripping the diary tightly. The light flickered again, and the room seemed to pulse with a silent rhythm. I stepped back to the door, my fingers brushing the cold brass handle. Outside, the corridor stretched dim and empty, lit by a single bulb that buzzed overhead. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only the distant hum of an air conditioner and the faint scrape of a chair somewhere down the hall. I debated leaving right then and there. I could pack up, check out, and drive through the night until I reached somewhere safer, somewhere normal. But something held me back. Maybe it was the absurdity of the situation, or the stubborn part of me that refused to be scared by an old motel and a hidden diary. I flipped the diary open again. This time, the words were different. The pages had changed. New lines appeared, describing my hesitation, my whispered question, and even the way my hands gripped the paper. It was as if the diary was alive, updating itself with every thought, every breath I took. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to shake my head and tell myself it was a trick of the light or a coincidence. But the cold in my chest said otherwise. I slid the diary back behind the mirror, careful not to disturb it too much. Then I stood there for a long moment, listening. The room was quiet, yes, but the silence had weight. It pressed against my skin and seeped into my bones. I didn't want to believe this was real. I still wanted to think it was some elaborate joke, a cruel prank meant to unnerve a weary traveler. But deep down, I knew the truth was far stranger and far darker than I could imagine. I was now alone in this room. Not by a long shot. And someone or something had been here before me, watching. Writing. Waiting. The flickering light above finally gave out, plunging me into darkness. I held my breath and waited for what came next. The darkness lingered longer than I expected. I had to see it again. Had to confirm that what I read wasn't some elaborate delusion triggered by exhaustion or the stale room air. So I fumbled for my phone, careful not to knock over the cheap lamp on the nightstand. Its screen cast a pale blue glow that didn't quite reach the corners of the room where shadows pulled like spilled ink. I flipped open the diary again, the pages now illuminated by my phone's light, and there it was, the entry, freshly etched, describing my internal panic, the way my hands shook, the way my breath hitched. It wasn't just some creepy journal. It was a live feed of my life here. My fingers grazed the paper, no ink smudges, no signs of wet ink. The words seemed frozen in time, yet they updated. How? Why? I forced myself to breathe slower, steadier. This wasn't just about a diary anymore. It was about whoever put it here, whoever had been tracking me, and maybe tracking others before me. I had to know. The first thing I did was check the room more methodically. I needed to find the source of this surveillance, if there was one. No cameras in plain sight. No microphones visible. The walls, thin and stained with years of neglect, seemed to close in. I traced my fingers along the seams near the mirror, tapping gently, listening for hollow spots. Nothing but the faint echo of my own heartbeat and the distant honks from the highway outside. Then I noticed it, a slight draft near the baseboard under the window. The window itself was sealed shut with old caulk, but the vent below it was loose, rattling slightly. I crouched down and peered inside. The vent led to a narrow crawl space between the walls. Maybe a place to hide something or someone. Or a way to spy on the room. I didn't want to imagine someone lurking in that crawl space, but the thought lodged itself in my mind like a tick. I pulled the vent cover off carefully, the metal cold and dusty in my hands. No wires, no microphones, no cameras. Just dust and a faint smell of mildew. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was a trap. I sat back on the bed, the diary now resting on my lap. The entries didn't just describe what I did, they detailed the smallest, most vulnerable moments, the way I rubbed my eyes when I was tired, the way my voice cracked when I muttered to myself. They even noted the thoughts I hadn't dared speak aloud. How could someone know that? I touched my forehead, the skin prickling with goosebumps. Someone had been inside this room while I was here. Someone who knew me better than I knew myself. The front door creaked, a soft noise that sliced through the thick quiet. I froze. My pulse throbbed in my ears. No one should be here. I told myself it was the wind. The old motel door wasn't exactly airtight. I reached for the diary again, scanning the latest entry. It described me noticing the doors creak just moments ago, the quickness of my breath, the cold sweat on my palms. I swallowed hard. This wasn't a coincidence. I wanted to call the front desk but hesitated. What would I say? Hello, someone's been spying on me, and I found a diary that knows all my secrets. They'd think I was losing it. Instead, I decided to check the other rooms. Maybe this was part of a pattern. Maybe someone had left diaries behind other mirrors. To find answers, I needed more clues. I grabbed the motel's directory from the dresser drawer, a thin booklet with faded ink and yellowed pages. The room stretched down a single corridor, each door identical, each a potential hiding place for whatever this was. I slipped on my shoes quietly, the thin soles pressing against the cracked linoleum floor. I cracked open the door just enough to peek into the hallway. Dim, flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and cleaning chemicals hung heavy in the air. I chose room 7, next door to mine. The door was locked, but the lock was old and flimsy. I pulled a bobby pin from my hair and fiddled with the mechanism, heart hammering. The lock clicked open. Inside, it was eerily similar to my own room, the same faded wallpaper, the same threadbare carpet, the same cheap furnishings. I moved cautiously toward the bathroom, where the mirror was the exact same size and style. I pulled at the edges, my fingers trembling, and to my horror, there it was again, the diary, tucked behind the mirror, exactly where I'd found mine. I flipped it open. The entries inside weren't mine, they belonged to someone else. someone who had stayed here a few weeks earlier. But the details were just as intimate, the way they paced at night, the way their thoughts darted between hope and dread. The entries ended abruptly 3 days ago. I closed the book slowly, my fingers numb. Someone had been here, watching this person too. I wondered if they ever found out. I wondered if they managed to leave. Returning to my room, I felt the walls closing in tighter. The diary on my lap felt heavier, as if it carried not just paper and ink but all the weight of those trapped inside its pages. I sat back down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, the wallpaper peeling in soft curls. The silence was still there, louder than ever. And then, without warning, my phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. It read, "You're not the first. You won't be the last." I dropped the phone onto the bed, the screen casting a ghostly glow. The words burned into my mind. I wasn't just a victim of a creepy diary. I was part of something far bigger and far worse. I stared at the ceiling, my fingers twitching, the air thick with dread. The room wasn't just a room. It was a cage. And someone was holding the key. The phone buzzed again. The room, dim and stale, smelled faintly of mildew and old carpet. The hum of the flickering fluorescent light overhead was uneven, sometimes dipping into silence, which made the quiet stretch too thin to hold. Outside, a car door slammed sharp, sudden, then the faint scrape of tires on gravel. Somewhere distant, a dog barked once, maybe twice. I heard my own breath, shallow, uneven, and the slow tick of the clock on the wall. I picked up the phone reluctantly. The screen showed the same message, no sender ID, no reply option. A chill crept up my spine. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Maybe someone messing with me, knowing I had the diary, trying to scare me. But the diary, that book wasn't a joke. It was real. And it was watching. I flipped the diary open again, the pages whispering as I turned them. Every last word was written in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. The entry stopped 3 days ago, but I had to know, had it started again? Had someone recorded me already? I scanned the last page. No new entries. But then, I noticed something odd. There was a faint, fresh smudge of ink near the bottom corner, as if someone had just pressed a pen there and wiped it away. Or maybe my imagination. I slammed the diary shut. I needed answers. I paced the room, fingers grazing the cracked plaster walls, tracing invisible patterns. The door to the bathroom was cracked open. I stepped inside, the cold tile floor sending a shiver up my spine. I stared back at the mirror. It had a strange, oily sheen, like someone had wiped it with something greasy. The edges were chipped, the kind of wear that only comes from years of neglect. The diary was hidden behind this mirror. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep it secret. But why? And who? I remember the entries, the way they chronicled every detail of my days here, my thoughts, my habits, even the clothes I chose. It wasn't just obsessive. It was invasive. Sickeningly precise. I whispered to myself, "Who are you?" The question felt foolish, but I couldn't stop. Not now. The phone buzzed again. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This time, a new message, "Look outside." Now. My breath hitched. I glanced toward the cracked window, the one with the faded curtain barely hanging on its rod. Outside, the moon was a thin crescent, casting just enough light to reveal the gravel parking lot. Empty, except for a single figure standing near the far edge, half shrouded in shadow. My skin prickled. I couldn't make out a face, but the stance was deliberate, almost casual. Waiting. I wanted to close the curtain, to hide, but my legs moved forward before I could stop them. The window was cold under my fingertips, the glass rough with grime. I squinted, heart hammering. The figure shifted, and I caught a glimpse of a pale hand tucked in a coat pocket. I stepped back, breath caught in my throat. Was this the watcher? The writer? Or someone else? I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to be the paranoid person who reported shadows. But I also couldn't ignore it. The diary on the bed seemed heavier than before, like a stone tied to my chest. I sat down, staring at it, and then at the window, and then back to the diary. The phone buzzed again. This time, a different number. Do you want to know why? The question hummed there, stark and cold. I typed back, "Who are you?" No reply. I felt trapped. The motel room was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. The walls pressed in, the air thickened, and the wallpaper seemed to curl tighter around me. I tried to think. I tried to remember if I'd seen anyone suspicious before. The clerk at the front desk? The other guests? No, none of them fit. None looked like they'd go to this much trouble. I thought about the diary again. How did it get there? Who put it behind the mirror, and how long had it been there? Was I the only one who found it? The text said I wasn't the first, but what did that mean? Was I part of some sick game? A twisted experiment? Or worse, a slow, deliberate stalking? My phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance. That same figure outside the motel. Only this time, I could see the face. It was me. In the photo, I was standing by the window, looking out. I dropped the phone. My fingers went numb. My skin prickled like static electricity. I looked around the room, suddenly convinced someone was watching me from every corner. I whispered, "This isn't real. It can't be." But the diary told me otherwise. It had every moment, every thought, every doubt I'd had since I arrived. I was inside a trap, designed to follow me, record me, and now mock me. I tried to call for help, but the line was dead. No dial tone. No signal. My phone only connected to these strange messages, these anonymous threats. I tried the door. Locked. Not just locked, the kind of lock that didn't budge, no matter how much I wrenched it. Panic bubbled up, hot and sharp. I pressed my back against the door, breathing hard. The diary lay open on the bed, the pages fluttering as if in a breeze that wasn't there. I glanced back at the bathroom mirror, half expecting to see the face of my watcher staring back. Nothing. Just my own pale reflection and the dim light flickering overhead. But then the mirror shifted slightly, a faint creak like old wood moving. I stepped forward, heart pounding. The reflection was normal, but the mirror was loose. I pulled at the corner. It gave way. Behind it, not another diary, but a small, dusty nook. Taped inside was a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was the same as the diary's. It read, "You can't leave. Not yet. The story isn't finished. And neither are you." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The room was closing in faster now, a cage with no key, no exit. I sank to the floor, the diary beside me, my breath ragged. There was no going back. No escape. Only the story. And me. The phone buzzed again. Another message, "We're watching. Always." I looked up, into the dark corners of the room, and whispered, "Then show yourself." Silence. Complete silence. But I knew I wasn't alone. The room had shrunk. A shiver ran down my spine, not from cold, but from something deeper, something raw and crawling. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, smash it into the wall, but my hands trembled too much. Instead, I pressed the power button and slipped it on the table. The screen went black. The silence returned, heavier than before. I crouched down, dragging the diary closer. The cover was worn, the edges frayed from use, but the pages inside were crisp, the ink fresh. I flipped to the last entry. It was written just moments ago, describing how I had found the crumpled note behind the mirror, my whispered challenge, and the silence that followed. The handwriting was neat, almost clinical. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just some random obsessed voyeur. This was someone who had been here, in this room, with me. Someone who knew every secret I'd buried inside my head, every doubt and fear flickering behind my eyes. And now they were narrating it, twisting it into a story I couldn't escape. Footsteps. Sharp and deliberate. Not outside the room. Inside. My skin prickled. I froze, listening. The old radiator hissed. The air smelled stale, like damp carpet and forgotten cigarettes. I could hear the faint scrape of something sliding across the floor. My breath caught, the taste of dust and cold metal filling my mouth. "Who's there?" My voice was rough, barely above a whisper. No answer. Just a soft shuffle again, closer now. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst free. The diary slipped from my hands, landing open on the floor with a muted thud. I couldn't think. Couldn't move. My limbs were heavy, like I was sinking into the threadbare carpet. The room was too small. Too quiet. Too alive. Then the phone buzzed. I glanced down. Another message, "You can't hide." Not from me. A cold laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. "Why? What do you want?" I said aloud, almost wishing for a voice in reply. The door to the bathroom creaked. A shadow shifted behind the cracked glass. I squinted, trying to make out a shape, but the flickering light played tricks. The mirror's surface rippled like a disturbed pond. A slow, deliberate tapping sounded against the glass. Tap. 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 My head snapped up. I realized the tapping coincided with the pattern of the diary's last words. It was a message. A taunt. Someone was here, watching, waiting. I forced myself to stand, muscles stiff and trembling. The diary lay like a trap on the floor. I grabbed it, flipping through pages, searching for anything, names, dates, clues. The entries chronicled every movement, every thought, every moment I'd spent in this room, but always from a distance, like a shadow lurking just beyond sight. Then I found something different. A page with no date, no time. Just a single sentence scrawled in shaky handwriting. "She's beginning to notice." The story might unravel soon. I swallowed hard. They knew. They knew I was aware. And they were scared. The lamp flickered again, casting long, crooked shadows across the ceiling. I felt the temperature drop. My breath fogged in front of me. The room's oppressive weight pressed down harder. I needed a plan. Something. Anything. I grabbed my phone again, turning it on despite the threat. I dialed 911. The line clicked, then rang. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I cursed under my breath. No signal. No connection. The motel was a dead zone. I was trapped. The footsteps returned, this time slow and measured, coming from the main door. My eyes darted there, heart hammering, lungs tightening. The doorknob rattled gently, like a whisper. Not enough force to open it, but enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I backed away, clutching the diary like a shield. The door didn't open, but the tapping continued, soft and insistent, against the bathroom mirror. I stared at it, desperate for any sign, any clue. Then the mirror shifted again. This time with a soft click, revealing a narrow slit behind it like a peephole or a slot for passing notes. My fingers trembled as I reached toward it. The diary slipped free from my grip and fluttered to the floor again. I glanced down just long enough to see the last page suddenly update, a fresh line written in hurried, jagged script. You're closer than you think. Don't try to run. A cold sweat slicked my skin. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream. To break something. To tear the whole room apart and find this twisted watcher. But I couldn't. Because I was already caught. In the story. In the room. In their eyes. The tapping stopped. Silence. Complete silence. And then, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable, breathed through the cracked door. Why do you think you're here? The question echoed in the small room, bouncing off peeling wallpaper and chipped paint. I pressed myself into the corner, the diary open in my lap, pages fluttering like trapped wings. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain, the story wasn't finished. And neither was I. A shadow shifted beyond the threshold, a silent promise that the past was still reaching for me, drawn to the secrets I dared uncover. The morning light came in thin and pale, slanting through the grimy curtains like it had no business being here. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the rough plaster cracked and yellowed above me, thinking about the diary. The diary that had been recording everything, every quiet moment, every thought I hadn't spoken aloud, every twitch of doubt or flicker of fear. It was like a mirror, only darker, reflecting not my face but the parts of me I didn't want anyone to see. And yet, it had been there all along, hidden behind the bathroom mirror, waiting. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what I'd felt when I first found it. Shock, disbelief, a prickling sense of being watched even though no one was around. I'd imagined 1,000 scenarios, none of them good. Someone had been inside this room, had been inside my head, without my knowing. The thought sent a cold spike through my chest. But now, with the sun inching across the floorboards and the silence thick like syrup, I realized something else. I wasn't just a victim. I was part of a story that someone else was writing, word by word, day by day. And maybe, just maybe, I could stop it. I got up. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet, the thin carpet rough against my skin. I paced the room, the diary still tucked under my arm. The motel smelled the same as when I'd arrived, stale cigarette smoke, a hint of mildew, and the faint, almost sweet odor of old wood settling. The flickering fluorescent light above the bed buzzed softly, like a nervous insect. I sat down at the small table, the one with the cracked veneer, and opened the diary to the last entry. It was recent, just a few hours old. I read it again. It described me getting up, pacing, feeling the cold floor, smelling the room. I swallowed hard. It was almost too much to bear. How had the writer gotten so close? How had they known? I slid my fingers across the page, then stopped. I didn't want to read anymore. I wanted to find the person who had been here, who had been watching me, but I didn't know where to start. Motel guests came and went, each a ghost in their own story. Maybe the cleaner. Maybe the owner. Maybe someone who had a key. The thought of someone having a key made me shiver. I thought back to the night before, the quiet tapping at the window, the strange, muffled footsteps in the hallway. I told myself it was nothing, just the old building settling or a stray animal. But now I wasn't sure. That tapping had been deliberate, a signal or a warning. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for a single car, a faded blue sedan rusting at the edge of the gravel. I tried to see inside, but the glass was dirty, and the morning light blinded me. I pressed my hand to the cold glass. The world outside looked normal, calm even. But I knew better. I turned away and went back to the bathroom. The mirror was still loose, the diary's hiding place obvious now. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages again. This time, I read between the lines, looking for clues, for the hand behind the words. The entries were meticulous, obsessive almost. They described my routines, my moods, my silences. But there was something else, something personal, a bitterness that seeped through the ink, a sense of loneliness so deep it made my skin crawl. I wondered what kind of person would do this. Not just watch, but document everything. Not just intrude, but invade. It wasn't about control or power, I told myself. It was about something darker, desperation, need, a craving for connection in the most twisted way. I sat down again, the diary heavy in my lap. I thought about my own loneliness, the way the motel had become a refuge and a prison all at once. I'd come here to escape, to hide from the noise of the world, but instead I'd stepped into someone else's quiet nightmare. The door creaked. I froze. It was the room next door. The thin walls did little to muffle the sound of a chair scraping the floor, a soft cough. My hands tightened around the diary. I told myself it was nothing, just a neighbor, but my throat felt tight, dry. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. I listened. The sound of breathing, steady, deliberate. Then the faint shuffle of footsteps moving away. I didn't know what I hoped for, an apology, a confession, a sign that I wasn't alone in this. But the silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing down on my chest. I realized then that the diary wasn't just a record. It was an invitation. Or a trap. The writer wanted me to know they were here, watching, waiting. I had to do something. I couldn't stay. But I couldn't just run away either. Not now. I packed the diary carefully into my bag and checked the room once more. The bathroom mirror was back in place, the writing hidden. I turned off the light and stepped outside. The air was sharp, cold against my skin. The motel looked tired in the daylight, its peeling paint and flickering neon sign a sad echo of better days. I walked to the office, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and found the owner behind the counter. She was older than I'd expected, with a tired smile and eyes that had seen too much. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice low. "I found something. A diary. Someone's been following me." She didn't blink. "This place has secrets," she said quietly. "Some people come for shelter. Others come to hide. And some never leave in the same way." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. I took my key, paid for the night, and stepped back into the cool morning. The diary felt like a weight against my ribs, both a burden and a key. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let this story be written by someone else anymore. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, sharp and lonely. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and started walking away from the motel, away from the watching eyes and ink-stained pages. For the first time in days, I looked forward. The story was mine now. Story 3, Vanishing Stranger on the Bridge, crossing between realities. I'd never given much thought to the old suspension bridge until the day I had to cross it. I remember standing at the edge of the bridge just before I stepped onto it, the wind tugging at the loose strands of hair across my forehead. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that presses down on you, making everything feel smaller. The river below, swollen from recent rains, churned dark and fast, swallowing the scattered sunbeams that tried to break through the clouds. I could taste the wet earth on my tongue, almost metallic, and the subtle bitterness of cold air. I didn't expect anything to be off that day. The bridge was a shortcut, a way to cut through the forest trail and get to the small town on the other side, a place I'd visited a dozen times before without incident. I was late meeting a friend for coffee, and the thought of taking the longer, paved route made my stomach twist with impatience. First step onto the planks, and the bridge groaned underfoot. Not a good sound, really. I glanced down, watching the river's restless swirl, then ahead at the cable towers. They looked as unstable as ever, but people crossed this bridge all the time. It was part of the town's charm, they said. Something to remind you that nature still held sway, that not everything was neat and predictable. Halfway across, I noticed a man standing near the far end, leaning casually against the railing. I should have felt relief to see another person there. Instead, something about him unsettled me. His face was familiar, like someone I'd known in passing, maybe a neighbor or a colleague. But the expression he wore was wrong. Too blank. Like a mask stretched tight over a stranger's skin. I froze. The wind picked up, tugging harder at the loose hem of my jacket. The wooden boards creaked again beneath my feet, louder this time. "Hey," I called out, voice catching. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. Just stared ahead, eyes fixed on the horizon where the forest met the sky. His lips twitched, almost as if he was trying to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The bridge swayed slightly. A low groan echoed from the cables. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled, though I wasn't sure if it was the cold or something else creeping deep inside my chest. "Sir," I said, stepping closer, "do you need help?" No answer. Only the faint rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog somewhere in the trees. I took another step forward, heart thudding painfully against my ribs. Then I blinked, and he was gone. Just like that. One moment he was there, leaning like a statue. The next, nothing but empty railing and the dull sound of the wind. I scanned the far side of the bridge. No sign of him. No footprints, no disturbance in the gravel path beyond. Just the quiet hum of the forest settling itself. I shook my head, trying to brush away the weird sensation crawling up my spine. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the man had slipped away while I blinked. It seemed ridiculous to worry about it. People disappear all the time. Happens every day. But still, a sliver of doubt lodged itself somewhere behind my eyes. When I reached the other side, something else felt off. The path was narrower than I remembered, the wildflowers along its edges more vivid, almost too bright against the muted greens of the trees. The air smelled sweeter, like honeysuckle rather than pine, and somewhere nearby, a bird called out a sharp, unfamiliar trill that made me pause. I tried to tell myself it was the light playing tricks, that my brain was just tired or jumpy. I'd been working late nights lately, running on too little sleep and too much caffeine. Maybe the bridge had rattled me more than I realized. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the place had shifted just a little while I crossed. Like a photograph that had been subtly edited, colors changed, edges blurred, but only enough to hint that something wasn't quite right. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check the map or call my friend, but the screen flickered and went dark. No signal. Odd, since the town beyond always had reception, even in the middle of the woods. I shook the phone, pressing the side button again. Nothing. Battery drained? I hadn't used it that much. I tried to remember, had I plugged it in last night? Maybe not. The usual annoyance of a dead phone settled in, but beneath it, a rising itch of unease. I looked up, scanning the horizon. The road curved away in the distance, lined by familiar signs. The gas station where I usually stopped for snacks, the old bakery with its faded awning. But something was wrong there too. The bakery's windows were cleaner than I recalled, almost spotless, without the usual layer of dust and grime. And the sign above it bore a different name, one I didn't recognize. I stepped closer, heart pounding now, breath catching in my throat. The door was unlocked. I peered inside. The shelves were stocked, but the items looked newer. The kind of freshness that comes from a place recently restocked, not one that's been sitting untouched for weeks as the old bakery had. I spun around. The street was quieter than it should be. No hum of passing cars, no chatter from people sitting outside the cafe. Only the rustle of leaves and the distant drone of cicadas. I called out. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the stillness. From behind, a figure emerged. Familiar again. This time, it was my friend, the one I was supposed to meet. But his smile was too wide, too forced, and his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Hey," he said, voice cheerful but brittle. "You took the long way." I blinked. "No, I didn't. I took the bridge." He frowned, a quick flash of something, confusion, annoyance crossing his face. "There's no bridge. Not anymore. They tore it down last year." I laughed nervously. "What?" "No, I just crossed it. It was right there." He shook his head slowly. "You're mixed up. That bridge has been gone for months." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My hands felt clammy. The world around me seemed to tilt, just slightly, like the edge of a dream slipping away. I looked back the way I'd come. The forest loomed dark and dense, the path swallowed by shadows. No sign of the bridge. Something was wrong. I knew it, deep down. But I had no idea how badly. And that was when the quiet settled in. Silence. Complete silence. Except for the soft, almost inaudible sound of footsteps behind me. The moment he said the bridge was gone, I stopped moving. A knot tightened in my stomach, and the air felt heavier somehow, thick with a silence that wasn't quite natural. There was a faint smell in the breeze, something like damp wood, but with a sharp metallic edge I couldn't place. I glanced back again, but the forest swallowed the path whole, shadows pooling between the trees like spilled ink. No bridge. None. Just the rough earth and tangled roots. "Wait," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You said they tore it down last year?" "But I just crossed it. I was on it. I don't remember anything else." His eyes flicked away, briefly, then back. "Maybe you got turned around," he said, but there was a hesitation beneath his words, something fragile and uncertain. The bridge was a safety hazard. They shut it down before they took it down, but the forest hasn't changed that much. You must have made a wrong turn. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm them, but the chill stuck to my skin. "I don't think so." It was right there. The chains creaked underfoot. The wind rattled the cables. I heard it. He shrugged, but his gaze didn't leave me. "Look, if you want, we can check with Sarah. She's been around longer. Maybe she knows something." Sarah. The idea of involving her felt both comforting and dangerous. She was practical, No nonsense, the kind of person who'd tell you to stop wasting time chasing ghosts. But maybe I needed that. Needed someone else to tell me what to think. We started walking toward the village. The sky overhead a dull wash of gray. The air had that damp, earthy scent that follows rain, but there wasn't a single drop falling. A dog barked in the distance, sharp and sudden, then silence again. My mind kept circling back to the bridge, to the impossible feeling of stepping through something that shouldn't have been there. Did you notice anything else weird? I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked at me sideways. Like what? People acting different. Places not quite right. You know, that kind of thing. He laughed, but it was short and a little forced. You mean like you're in some parallel universe? Sounds like you've been reading too many sci-fi novels. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, probably. We reached the cafe where Sarah worked, a small place with chipped paint on the windowsill and the faint aroma of strong coffee mixed with something burnt. Inside, the buzz of conversation was low but steady. She was behind the counter, wiping down tables with a rag that looked like it had seen better days. When she saw us, her face brightened, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "Hey, what's up?" she said, setting the rag down. I hesitated, then told her about the bridge, about how I'd crossed it only to be told it didn't exist anymore. She frowned, lips pressed tight. That's odd. I remember the bridge, sure used to fish off it when I was a kid. But it's been gone for a while now. Been replaced by a new roadway up the valley. I saw it. I swear, I said. Chains, planks, the whole thing. It was shaky but still there. Sarah glanced at my friend, who just shrugged. Maybe you slipped or mixed up the paths, she suggested. The forest can play tricks on you, especially when you're tired or stressed. I'm not tired, I said quickly. It was real. She studied me for a moment, then leaned in. Look, if you're serious, you should check the old ranger station. Might be some logs or records there, if they kept them. Could tell you when the bridge was actually taken down. That sounded like a plan. Something concrete. Something I could hold on to instead of this creeping uncertainty that was gnawing at me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cafe's sign. The sky darkened, shadows stretching across the pavement like fingers. I glanced back toward the forest's edge. There was a flicker of movement, a shape slipping between trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. I'm going to the ranger station, I said. Want to come? My friend exchanged a look with Sarah, then nodded. Better stick together. We set off again, the path crunching underfoot with dry leaves and broken twigs. The forest felt alive in a different way now, watching, waiting. The smell of damp earth was stronger here, mixed with something faintly chemical, like bleach or paint thinner. It made me wrinkle my nose. The ranger station was a squat, wooden building, half hidden by overgrown bushes and vines. The paint was peeling, and the windows were clouded with dirt. Inside, the air was stale and musty, filled with the scent of old paper and decay. Filing cabinets stood against one wall, their drawers jammed shut or missing entirely. I flipped on my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. Dust motes floated in the air, caught in the narrow shaft of light. I pulled open a drawer and found a stack of papers, yellowed and brittle. The dates were all from the previous year, reports about trail maintenance, weather damage, and yes, the bridge. One entry caught my eye. It was a memo from a local official, dated just before the bridge was supposedly dismantled. It mentioned safety concerns and plans to remove the structure as soon as possible. But the last line was odd. It read, removal delayed due to unforeseen complications. Bridge remains until further notice. I frowned. That contradicted what I'd been told. If the bridge was still there when the memo was written, why was everyone insisting it was gone now? I showed the note to Sarah and my friend. Sarah's brow furrowed. Maybe they never actually took it down? Then why would they say they did? I asked. And why does it feel like something changed when I crossed it? My friend was quiet, staring out a grimy window. Maybe it's not about the bridge itself. Maybe it's what happens when you cross it. I looked back at the papers, then at the dark forest beyond the window. A creeping sense of dread settled in my chest. This wasn't just a missing bridge or a neighborhood rumor. Something was off, deeply off. The air grew heavy with an uneasy silence as I approached the crumbling path that no one dared to tread. As we left the ranger station, the wind was colder now, and the sky had turned an angry shade of slate. The trees whispered secrets I couldn't quite catch. I touched the note in my pocket, feeling the rough edges between my fingers. I needed to know more. Had to. But with every step back toward the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That the world I thought I knew was quietly shifting beneath my feet. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to cross back. The dim light of the motel room flickered again as I sat back down at the cluttered table, the crumpled memo still in my hand. Outside, the wind pressed against the window pane with a persistent, low moan, a sound that had been haunting me ever since I first crossed that bridge. I glanced over at Sarah, who was scrolling through her phone, face pale and tight. My friend, Jake, stayed silent, staring out toward the distant tree line, his jaw clenched. I tapped the note lightly, still trying to make sense of it. Unforeseen complications, it said. What kind of complications? And why wasn't there any follow-up? The local official's memo was dated over a year ago. I thought the bridge was gone, but if the memo was right, it wasn't. And more importantly, if the bridge was still there, why did crossing it feel like stepping into a warped version of reality? Sarah looked up sharply. Are you sure this isn't just some bureaucratic delay? Maybe they ran out of funding, or there was a lawsuit or something. Her voice was steady, but I caught the tremor beneath it. I shook my head. No. This feels different. Like someone doesn't want it gone. Jake finally turned from the window. Or maybe no one wants us to leave once we cross. His eyes, dark and unfocused, unsettled me more than any ghost story ever could. I rubbed my temples. That sounds crazy. Jake shrugged. Maybe. But I've been thinking about what you said about the changes. The people acting weird, landmarks missing or altered. What if it's not the bridge itself? What if the whole area beyond it has been manipulated? Manipulated. The word stuck in my mind like a splinter. The idea that this wasn't supernatural, but something engineered, something human-made, made the whole thing worse. Fear grounded in reality has a way of creeping under your skin. I stood and walked over to the window, staring out into the night. The forest beyond the motel seemed darker, almost as if the shadows themselves were thicker. The air smelled damp, with a faint metallic tang. My skin prickled. We need to check the other side, I said quietly. If this is some kind of setup, maybe there's a pattern. A reason why people behave the way they do. Sarah frowned. You want to go back? Tonight? I hesitated. The thought of stepping onto that bridge again made my stomach twist. But I couldn't leave this half-answered. Not now. Not after everything I'd seen. Jake nodded slowly. I'm in. But let's be smart about it. We agreed to wait until just before dawn. The night stretched long, filled with uneasy silence and the occasional creak of the old building settling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, hidden just out of sight. When the first pale light seeped through the curtains, we slipped out, careful not to wake the others in the motel. The air was cool, damp with early morning mist. The road to the bridge was quiet, the familiar gravel crunching underfoot. As we neared the suspension bridge, the fog clung to the ground like a veil, swallowing the lower cables in a ghostly haze. I paused, fingers tightening around the cold steel railing. The bridge looked exactly the same, weathered wood, frayed ropes, but the feeling was different now. Heavier. Like it was waiting. We stepped onto the first plank. The bridge creaked softly under our weight, a rhythmic whisper that matched my quickening heartbeat. I forced myself to look straight ahead. Halfway across, the mist thickened. Shapes moved just beyond the edge of vision, figures standing motionless among the trees, watching. Not people I recognized. Or were they? I squinted, mind racing. Could I trust my eyes? Sarah's voice broke the silence. Did you see that? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I had. Someone's out there. Jake's lips pressed into a thin line. Exactly. And they're not just watching. A sudden shift in the air made me stumble. The bridge rocked. Not from wind, but from deliberate movement. Footsteps. Not ours. We stopped, breath shallow. The sound was soft, measured, coming closer from behind. Who's there? I called, voice stronger than I felt. No answer. Just the crunch of gravel and the faint rustle of leaves. Then a voice, low and calm, but with an edge that sent a chill down my spine. You shouldn't have come back. I whipped around, heart hammering. A man stepped out from the fog, face obscured by shadows. His eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating. Who are you? Sarah asked, voice steady. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Caretakers. That's what they call us. His gaze flicked to the bridge behind us. This place has rules. Crossing isn't just about getting from one side to another. It's about commitment. Once you step on, there's no turning back. A shiver ran through me. Commitment to what? To the truth, he said. Or to the lie you want to believe. Jake shifted beside me, tension coiling in his muscles. Are you saying this is some kind of trap? Not a trap, the man replied smoothly. Opportunity. But it comes with a cost. He gestured toward the far side of the bridge. You're past the point of no return. The world you knew, it's gone. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. The bridge wasn't just a physical crossing. It was a boundary. And I'd crossed it. Twice now. Why? I whispered. Why do this? He shrugged. Because some things are meant to be hidden. Because people aren't ready for the truth. Because control is easier when no one remembers the way back. My hands trembled. I looked at Sarah and Jake. Their faces mirrored my own confusion and fear. Can we leave? Sarah asked, voice small. He shook his head. Not anymore. The fog whispered secrets around me as I stepped onto the forgotten crossing beneath the gray sky. Silence. Complete silence. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever I'd stepped into, it wasn't just a strange rumor about a disappearing bridge. It was a deliberate, human-made boundary designed to keep people trapped psychologically, physically, maybe both. And now that I'd crossed it, I couldn't simply walk away. I glanced back at the bridge, the planks stretching into the fog. Behind us, the world I knew was already fading. Ahead, an uncertain reality waited, one that wasn't meant for outsiders. The caretaker's eyes held me fast. Decide quickly. Stay and learn the truth, or try to go back and lose everything. My breath caught. The bridge creaked again, a harsh reminder that time was slipping away. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped forward. There was no turning back. The man's words clung to the damp air like a stubborn fog. Not anymore. I repeated it silently, as if saying it aloud could make the reality sink in. We were trapped not by chains, but by the very bridge beneath our feet. The planks creaked underfoot, a brittle heartbeat in the vast silence. Jake's jaw tightened. So what now? We just wait for something, or someone. The man smiled thinly. Waiting isn't an option. The bridge demands movement. Forward. Always forward. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes wide and shimmering under the pale moonlight. But where does it lead? You said the world we knew was gone. What's on the other side? I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell her I didn't know, but that wasn't true. Part of me refused to accept the truth, to admit that the familiar had slipped away like sand through trembling fingers. The man watched us, his gaze sharp as a hawk's, waiting for a sign of surrender. I took a breath, cold and ragged. We keep going, I said, voice barely above a whisper. We have to. My hands trembled, fingers curling around the frayed edge of the railing. The wood was rough, splintered from years of neglect, and it smelled faintly of mildew and rust. Jake stepped forward, the boards groaning beneath his weight. I don't like this. None of it. Neither did I. But hesitation felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. The bridge stretched ahead, a thin line fading into darkness. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant echo of voices. Or maybe just the wind playing tricks. I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was a tangle of doubt and fear. As we moved, the air grew colder, sharper. The scent of wet earth mixed with something else, a faint, metallic tang that made my stomach twist. I glanced down at the water far below, black and indifferent, swallowing the moon's reflection whole. Then, the first shift. A figure appeared on the other side, standing just beyond the bridge's end. At first, I thought it was someone from the village, a familiar face I knew too well. But the way they stood was wrong. Too still, too deliberate. An uncanny stillness that made the hairs on my neck bristle. Do you see that? I whispered to Jake and Sarah. Jake squinted. Looks like Mrs. Hargrove? But she was supposed to be in the hospital. Exactly. Mrs. Hargrove, our neighbor, the sweet old woman who baked pies and told stories, was here, on this other side, in a version of our world that shouldn't exist. My heart pounded. This wasn't just about crossing a bridge, it was about stepping into a place where reality bent and fractured. Maybe it's someone who looks like her, Sarah suggested, voice uncertain. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as we drew closer, the figure's expression twisted, a slow, unnatural smile that didn't reach her eyes. The warmth I remembered was gone, replaced by something cold and hollow. Her gaze locked onto me, unblinking, unmoving. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat. That's not Mrs. Hargrove. My fingers dug into the railing, nails scraping the wood. It can't be. Jake grabbed my arm, steadying me. We need to keep moving. Don't stop. The man's voice cut through the tension like an item. You're seeing it now. The cracks. The truth. What truth? I demanded, voice shaking. What are you trying to do to us? He stepped closer, his eyes dark pools reflecting the night. Control. Manipulation. The bridge doesn't just connect places. It connects possibilities. Versions of people, of lives that can be twisted, shaped by those who understand how to bend the rules. My mind reeled. It was too much. Too unbelievable. And yet, the evidence was all around me. Sarah shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. This is insane. We can't stay here. Then we leave, Jake said, voice low. Back the way we came. No, the man shook his head. You can't. You crossed the point of no return. The bridge closes behind you. He gestured to the far side. You're committed now. The wind howled, rattling the rusted cables that held the bridge together. A low, groaning sound like the protest of an ancient beast. The boards beneath us trembled with every gust. I forced myself forward, one shaky step at a time. The air thickened, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. Sweat beaded at my temples despite the chill. My breath came in short bursts, the taste metallic in my mouth. Suddenly, a voice called out, soft, almost hesitant. Help me. We froze. It was Sarah. No, she said quickly, shaking her head like she was trying to shake off a nightmare. I didn't say that. But the voice came again, clearer this time. Please. Help me. I looked around, heart hammering. The bridge was empty except for us and the man, who watched with unreadable eyes. Where? Jake asked, scanning the shadows. From the water, Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Someone's down there. I peered over the edge. The river below was a black ribbon, silent except for the occasional drip of water from the bridge's cables. Nothing moved. Maybe it's just the wind, I said, though my voice betrayed me. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged, wet, tangled in branches, crawling slowly toward the bank on the far side. The man's smile returned, colder this time. See? The bridge reveals everything. The lost. The forgotten. The desperate. Sarah's knees buckled. Jake caught her before she fell. Who was that? I stood at the edge of the bridge again, the same place I'd first stepped onto those swaying planks. The air was colder now, but not from the wind. It was the silence that had settled like a weight, pressing down on my skin, making my hair stand on end. The fog had lifted, but instead of clarity, I felt only the sharp sting of uncertainty. I remember how I'd laughed earlier, nervously, trying to convince myself that the stories were nonsense. That crossing the bridge didn't really mean slipping into some twisted echo of reality where nothing was quite right. But now, after everything I'd seen, faces I knew acting like strangers, landmarks that had shifted just enough to throw me off balance, I wasn't so sure. The world on the other side wasn't mine. Or maybe it was, but fractured, like a cracked mirror reflecting something darker. I traced the worn cables with my eyes, each one humming with tension, connecting me to a place I wasn't sure I wanted to reach or to leave behind. My hands were clammy, fingers twitching involuntarily. The bridge groaned softly beneath my weight, a low, mournful sound that echoed in my chest. Behind me, the village looked almost normal. The same peeling paint on the storefronts, the same crooked street signs. But I caught a flicker of movement, a man standing too still by the corner cafe, watching me with two wide eyes. I swallowed. He didn't blink. I didn't recognize him, but the shape of his jaw, the way he held himself, felt unsettlingly familiar. Hey, I called out, voice trembling more than I wanted. Do you know if the bus comes through here today? He didn't answer. Just continued to stare, his mouth twitching as if he were about to say something but couldn't. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared down an alley. I waited, heart hammering, until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. The smell of damp earth mixed with the bitter tang of exhaust filled the air. I tried to focus on the bridge again, the one path between what was and what might be. But the knot in my stomach tightened. I thought about turning back. Maybe this had all been a mistake, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation. But I couldn't. Not after the way my reflection had smiled back at me when I blinked, or the way the church bell had rung twice when it should have been only one. Those weren't mistakes. They were signs. A cough shattered the quiet. I spun around, half expecting to see the man again. Instead, an old woman emerged from the shadows near the market stall. Her eyes were sharp, almost accusatory. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice low but firm, like a warning etched into years of silence. "Not anymore." I'm just passing through," I stammered, trying to sound casual, though my throat was dry. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." She shook her head slowly. "Trouble finds those who cross this bridge. You've seen what's changed. You've heard the stories. But it's not the bridge that shifts. It's the people. The world stays the same. It's us who break." Her words sank deep, heavier than the mist that hung around us. I realized then that the horror wasn't some supernatural force or parallel universe, it was the fracture between people. The way fear twists friendships into suspicion, how familiarity can turn into cold indifference overnight. I looked back at the bridge. It was no longer just an obstacle, it was a test. Could I cross it without losing myself? Could I accept that the world on the other side might never feel like home again? The old woman stepped closer, her breath smelling faintly of herbs and smoke. "You've got a choice now. Keep walking forward, or go back and live with what you've learned. But remember this, sometimes, the hardest journey is the one that brings you home." I nodded, though my hands still trembled. The bridge creaked beneath me as I took the first step forward. The planks felt rough against my boots, the ropes tight and unyielding. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of children laughing somewhere down the valley. It was a sound I used to find comforting, but now it felt distant, unreachable. Halfway across, I stopped. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold air, the scent of pine and wet stone filling my lungs. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a pale light on the path ahead. The world on the other side wasn't perfect. It was fractured, uncertain, and maybe a little broken. But it was real. When I opened my eyes, the village on this side looked cleaner, almost vibrant. The cafe had fresh flowers on the windowsill. The man from before sat outside, sipping coffee, smiling just like I remembered. It wasn't the same man, not really. But it was close enough. I stepped off the bridge and onto the familiar ground. The knot in my chest loosened. I felt the rough bark of a tree beneath my fingertips and the warmth of the sun on my face. It wasn't the world I had left behind. It was something new, a place where the past and present tangled, but where I could still find a way forward. I didn't know if I'd ever cross that bridge again. Maybe I wouldn't have to. Maybe understanding what I'd seen was enough. The fear, the confusion, it was a part of me now, but it wouldn't define me. I turned and walked toward the village, each step steady, deliberate. The bridge was behind me, a silent witness to the journey that changed everything. And as I moved forward, I realized that sometimes the scariest places aren't the ones we cross, they're the ones we carry with us. The sun warmed my back. The air smelled of rain and earth. I was home. Or close enough. And that was enough. Story 4, Eyes on the Ridgeway, Hidden Watchers on the Trail. I had been told that the Ridgeway Trail was one of those quintessential hikes, picturesque, well-marked, and steeped in history. Nothing more than a gentle challenge for an early autumn morning. The kind of place where locals bring their dogs, and tourists like me come for a few hours of clean air and a break from the usual city grind. I wasn't exactly a seasoned hiker, but I'd done enough wandering through parks and wooded paths to know what to expect: the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the occasional bird call, the faint smell of pine and damp earth. Simple, straightforward. That morning, the sky was a muted gray, not quite threatening rain, but not exactly promising sun either. It hung low, a heavy blanket that seemed to draw the scent of moss and wet bark out of the trees. The air was cooler than I expected for early October, sharp enough to make me pull my jacket a little tighter around my neck. I liked that feeling, the slight bite of cold on my skin, the way it kept me alert. I started the trail just after 9, my backpack light except for a water bottle, a small notebook, and my phone, which I mostly kept in airplane mode. I wanted this to be unplugged, a chance to shake off the fatigue of my desk job and the endless drone of emails. The path was narrow but clear, winding through clusters of birch and oak. I passed a few other hikers, mostly couples and small groups, exchanging brief smiles or nods. No one seemed in a particular rush. The usual polite distance, the kind that lets you pass without feeling obligated to make conversation. Around the first mile marker, a roughly carved wooden post painted white, I noticed something odd. It was a small piece of paper, taped to the back with clear packing tape, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I almost missed it because it blended in with the bark of the tree it was attached to. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stopped. The paper wasn't official looking at all. No logos or printed fonts, just messy handwriting in dark ink. It said, "They see everything. Don't trust the trail." I blinked. It felt like a joke, or maybe one of those cryptic messages people leave behind as part of some viral prank. But who would go to the trouble of taping a note like that to a tree on a public hiking trail? And why? The words stuck with me, though I tried to shake them off. Probably just a hiker's idea of a ghost story or a warning to watch out for slippery spots. I slipped the note into the pocket of my jacket, partly because I didn't want to litter and partly because I figured I'd take a picture of it later, proof, in case I wanted to look it up or share it online. The trail curved upward after that, and the sounds of the forest changed. Leaves rustled louder, like whispers in the wind. Somewhere off to the left, a woodpecker hammered at a distant trunk. The dampness in the air made the cold settle deeper into my bones. I took a few sips of water, wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and tried to focus on the rhythm of my steps. About 20 minutes later, I passed a clearing with a bench overlooking a small valley. I sat down for a moment, pulling out my notebook to jot down the note's strange phrase. As I scribbled, a flicker of movement caught my eye near a cluster of bushes across the clearing. A man, I think. Or someone wearing dark clothes, crouched low, almost hidden. He didn't seem to be watching me, but when I looked directly, he vanished behind the foliage. The thought chilled me to the bone. I swallowed hard, trying not to let my imagination run wild. Maybe a hunter, though I hadn't seen any signs warning about that. Or a photographer, waiting for the perfect shot. But the way he disappeared so quickly felt off. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the notebook and stood up. Back on the trail, the trees grew thicker, the path less trodden. I noticed another sign, this time carved into a wooden plank nailed to a tree trunk. The letters were scratched roughly, "They track your steps. Those who vanish never return." I stopped dead. Reading those words made the damp chill crawl up my spine. The usual ambience sounds, the rustling leaves, distant birdsong, seemed to dull, swallowed by a sudden heaviness in the air. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows. No one. I thought about turning back. Honestly, I did. But something about these notes gnawed at me. It wasn't just a prank anymore. It felt like a warning, a thread leading somewhere I didn't want to follow but couldn't ignore. The push and pull of curiosity versus caution is familiar. I know how that sounds, like a bad cliché from a thriller, but it's real. I tucked the note into my jacket again, this time more carefully, and kept walking, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. The trail looped back toward a small wooden bridge crossing a creek. The water was clear, the stones slick with moss. I leaned over the railing, watching the slow swirl of water around dark rocks. The smell of wet leaves and fresh pine sharpened. A sudden breeze sent a shiver through me. Just then, my phone buzzed. Odd. I kept it on airplane mode. I pulled it out, heart picking up pace. One message. No contact saved, just a string of numbers I didn't recognize. We see you. The message was brief, without punctuation. I stared at it, a cold sweat breaking out on my palms. The creek's babble suddenly sounded louder, harsher, like it was mocking me. I looked up, scanning the trees. No movement. But the feeling didn't leave. It felt like eyes, dozens of them, tracking every breath I took. I stuffed the phone back into my pack, hands now shaking more noticeably. The trail ahead seemed darker, though the sun was still high enough to cast sharp shadows. I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or something else, but the forest didn't feel like a quiet refuge anymore. It felt watched, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out why. But then again, the creek's murmur had dwindled to a faint thread, almost drowned by the steady crunch of my boots on the forest floor. I ducked under a low-hanging branch, the needle scratching my forehead, and stopped to catch my breath. The sun was dipping, light thinning through the pines. Shadows stretched long and sharp. I took out my notebook, an old habit when I hiked alone, and scribbled the message, the date, the time. If this was some kind of prank, it had teeth. If not, then I was in trouble, and this was my only record. There was a faint rustle behind me. I whipped around, heart hitting my ribs like a drum. Nothing but a squirrel darting up a tree. The relief was immediate but fleeting. I swallowed, the dry forest air scraping my throat. The trail curved ahead, narrowing between two moss-covered boulders. I noticed something strange on the rock to the right, a small, almost imperceptible carving. I crouched, brushing away dirt and lichen to reveal a symbol, a circle crossed by two diagonal lines, crude but deliberate. Below it, etched in shaky letters, was a date, March 14th, 19. My fingers trembled. The date was almost 5 years old. Someone had been here before me, leaving a mark, some kind of sign. Maybe a warning. I scanned the surrounding trees and spotted another carving, this one on a bent sapling. It read, "Stay silent. Watchers near." The words were smeared with dark streaks, like the bark had been scraped raw. I traced the letters with my finger, the bark rough and peeling. Whoever left these had been scared. Or they wanted me to be scared. I tucked my notebook under my arm and pressed on, eyes flicking between trees and trail. The forest seemed to close in, branches snagging at my sleeves, twigs snapping underfoot. The sun dipped below a ridge, and the temperature dropped sharply. I pulled my jacket tighter, the dampness in the air, cold and heavy with silence now biting. Had I imagined the feeling of eyes before? Maybe. But now, I was certain. Not just eyes, cameras or microphones, something mechanical hidden in the undergrowth. I stopped and listened. A faint metallic click, like a camera shutter, echoed somewhere to my left. My breath hitched. "Hello?" I called, voice low and cautious. The forest swallowed the word. Silence. Complete silence. I cursed myself for speaking. That was exactly what they wanted, to know I was here, to draw me out. I slid my phone back into my pack and dug for the small mirror I always carried. Holding it up, I angled it toward the trees, scanning for reflections or unnatural glints. There. A flicker of light, half hidden behind a thick trunk, no bigger than a fist. My stomach tightened. I inched closer, heart hammering loud enough to drown out the forest's usual sounds. Behind the tree, a tiny lens stared back. I snapped a picture with my phone, hands shaking. The camera was real. Someone had been watching this trail, watching me. I wanted to turn back. I really did. But the thought of leaving without answers gnawed at me. What was this surveillance? Why here? And who were these watchers? I pulled my pack straps tighter and pressed on. The trail led me to a small clearing where the trees thinned, revealing the crumbling ruins of what looked like an old ranger station. The building was overgrown with ivy, windows shattered, door hanging on one hinge. A cold wind whispered through the hollow shell, carrying the faint scent of mildew and forgotten years. I stepped inside, boots sinking into damp leaves and broken glass. The floorboards creaked underfoot. On the wall, half covered by peeling paint, were more carvings. This one was clearer, a message scratched deeply into the plaster. They erased the lost. A shiver ran down my spine. Erase? That was a chilling word. I reached out to touch the letters, rough and brittle under my fingertips. The air smelled stale, like the building hadn't breathed in decades. I pulled out my phone again, zooming in on the photo of the camera lens. There was a number faintly visible on the casing, maybe a model or serial. I made a note to look it up later, though I doubted any ordinary search engine would reveal much. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside made me freeze. Not mine. Not the squirrels. Heavy, deliberate steps. Someone else was here. I ducked behind a fallen beam, heart thudding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. The door creaked open slowly. A figure stepped in tall, wearing a hooded jacket, face shadowed. They paused, scanning the room, then muttered something under their breath. I caught a word, target. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just surveillance. It was something more sinister. Someone was tracking people, maybe even deciding who disappeared. I swallowed hard, weighing my options. I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed to know why. And I needed allies. I thought back to the hikers I'd seen earlier, the ones who'd vanished from the trail's records. Were they victims of this erasure? The figure moved deeper into the ruins. I crept toward the door, planning to slip away unnoticed, but a sudden breeze slammed it shut with a bang. The shadow spun around, voice sharp, "You shouldn't be here." I froze, breath caught between fear and defiance. The game had changed. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a player. And now, I had to survive. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing off the cracked stone walls like a judge's gavel. The air smelled damp, a mix of mildew and something metallic that reminded me of old pennies, sticky and sharp. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My eyes adjusted slowly, tracing the outline of the figure's hooded jacket. The shadow shifted again, closer now, but not fast enough to be threatening. Calculated. Controlled. "Look," I managed, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want trouble. I just want answers." The figure didn't respond at first. Instead, they pulled back the hood just enough to reveal a pale face, eyes dark and tired but alert. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and learned not to blink. Answers? The voice was low, almost tired. "You're in too deep already." I stepped forward, my boots scraping on broken concrete. I saw the signs, the warnings, the disappearances. You're watching us, tracking us. A bitter laugh. Tracking? That's putting it kindly. We don't just watch. We decide. The cold seeped into my spine. Decide what? Who? Why? Who's we? I asked, forcing the words out. The figure hesitated, then motioned for me to follow deeper into the ruins. Not here. Every instinct screamed to run, but the door was locked behind me. No turning back. I followed, heart thudding like a drum in a silent hall. The corridor narrowed, walls closing in with peeling plaster and faint graffiti, some of it fresh, some older, layers like scars. The faint glow of a flickering light bulb buzzed overhead. The air grew heavier, thick with dust and something acrid I couldn't place. The figure stopped by a rusted metal hatch hidden behind a loose panel. They knelt, fingers tracing symbols carved crudely into the metal. You've seen the warnings, they said quietly. They're not just to scare people off. They're to protect. Protect from what? My voice cracked. Was I chasing shadows or something real? From losing yourself, they said. From becoming one of the vanished. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward into darkness. A faint hum pulsed up from below, like the heartbeat of a machine. I hesitated, the urge to bolt gnawing at me. But curiosity was a stubborn anchor. I need to know, I said. The figure nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then gestured for me to go first. My fingers grazed the cold metal railing, slick with condensation. Each step echoed sharply, swallowed quickly by the thick silence. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a cavernous room humming with low light. Banks of screens lined the walls, each flickering with grainy footage of various points along the trail, the narrow bends, the dense thickets, the empty campsites. 100 eyes staring without rest. This is the nerve center, the figure whispered. All surveillance converges here. I stepped closer, watching a screen showing a young woman hiking alone. Her smile was bright, unaware of the eyes tracking her every move. Then the feed flickered. The woman paused, looked around like she sensed something, then vanished, cut out like a glitch. Disappeared, I breathed. Just like the others. Yes. The figure's voice was steady but shadowed with something I couldn't place. Regret, maybe. Not all disappearances are accidents. Some are corrections. Corrections? The word tasted bitter. Who's making these decisions? They turned fully toward me, expression grim beneath the hood. Higher-ups. People who believe the trail and those who walk it are liabilities. Loose ends that can't be allowed to unravel the operation. I blinked, the room spinning slightly. Operation? Covert surveillance isn't the whole story, they said. It's a cover. The real goal is control. Manipulate who stays, who goes. Erase those who don't fit the narrative. The cold logic of it hit me like a punch. This wasn't some rogue group or local prank. It was systematic. Organized. Ruthless. Why am I still here? I asked, voice trembling in spite of myself. Why haven't I been corrected? The figure hesitated, then lifted a small device from a table. Because you're now part of the system, whether you like it or not. They pressed a button, and a screen lit up with my own face, eyes wide, mouth parted in shock. The footage was from a hidden camera I hadn't noticed, tracking me since I entered the trailhead. You've been tagged since day one, they said softly. No one leaves once they're in. Not really. My breath caught. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the hum of machines growing louder. Outside, the forest's quiet menace pressed against the building like a living thing, waiting. "I don't want this," I said. "I can still walk away." No, the figure shook their head slowly, ice cold. "Once you know, there's no turning back. You've crossed the point of no return." I looked around, searching for an exit, a crack in the system, any sign of hope. But the screens kept rolling, faces of the missing flickering in and out, a few silent warnings etched in digital ghosts. The figure stepped back into shadow, voice dropping to a whisper. "The trail doesn't just track your steps. It tracks your choices. And now, it's watching you more closely than ever." The hum shifted, a low vibration under my feet. The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a hidden machine, calculating, waiting. I swallowed, the weight of the truth settling deep. This wasn't a hike anymore. It was a trap. A sudden beep from the console startled me. A new message flashed across the main screen, target confirmed. Initiate protocol. Silence. Complete silence. Then the lights flickered, dimming as the room plunged into shadow. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. And the forest outside leaned in even closer, waiting for my next move. The room breathed with a muted pulse, the walls glowing faintly as the lights flickered out, swallowed by a creeping darkness. "Protocol initiated," the voice whispered again, softer this time, almost teasing. I swallowed hard. That beep, the message flashing across the screen, it wasn't a joke or some glitch. Someone was behind this, watching every move, every hesitation. And now, they were playing a game with me. I reached out, fumbling toward the console, fingers brushing cold plastic. The screen was dead, black. No faces, no messages, just silence. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. I could almost hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Why me?" I muttered, voice cracking in the dark. "What do you want?" The answer was the same as before, nothing. No response, just a low thrum growing louder, as though the room itself was closing in. I tried to steady myself against the wall, fingers tracing the rough plaster. It was cold and damp, the smell of mildew thick in the air. Somewhere close, a pipe groaned, slow, deliberate. I imagined footsteps, but there was nothing. No shadows moving. Just the weight of waiting. I thought about the trail outside, about the signs I found earlier, the warnings carved into bark and scratched onto rocks. Messages meant to scare off the curious or guide the lost. But this was different. This was organized. Methodical. I wasn't just a wanderer anymore, I was a target. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a faint glow from a crack beneath a door I hadn't noticed before. My pulse jumped. Was it an exit? Or a trap? I inched closer, every nerve screaming to turn back, but curiosity clawed louder. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow stairwell spiraling down into deeper darkness. The cold air that spilled out was sharp, smelling of earth and something metallic I couldn't place. I hesitated, the silence pressing like a physical weight. "Don't do this," I whispered to myself, but my feet moved anyway, descending step by cautious step. The walls closed in, slick with condensation, and the faint hum grew into a low roar beneath the floorboards. Halfway down, I caught sight of something scrawled in black marker on the wall. Letters shaky, hurried, they watch. They wait. You're not alone. A chill snaked down my spine. Who was here before me? And where were they now? The stairwell opened into a cramped basement, lit only by a flickering fluorescent bulb that buzzed overhead. Banks of equipment lined the walls, screens, wires, and devices I barely understood. Each screen displayed live feeds, Cameras pointed at trailheads, hikers, even remote clearings deep in the forest. Faces I recognized. A woman with a red jacket, a man carrying a blue pack, a boy no older than 10. And then, something more disturbing. One screen showed a blinking red dot moving across a map, a trail marked in glowing lines. My trail. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The dot paused, then moved steadily forward, closer to my current location. A voice crackled through a speaker mounted near the ceiling. "You shouldn't be here," it said, calm but with an edge I couldn't ignore. "Why don't you stop now?" I swallowed. I wanted to say something, to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I scanned the room, searching for a way out, a clue, an ally, anything. My eyes landed on a small table cluttered with notebooks and scraps of paper. I rifled through them, hands trembling. The notes were frantic, filled with names, dates, times, and cryptic phrases: Protocol Alpha, extraction scheduled, subject non-compliant. One sheet had a list of missing hikers, names I'd seen on the screens, some crossed out, others circled in red. At the bottom, scribbled in hurried handwriting, last known location, Sector 7. Proceed with caution. The weight of it crashed down hard. These people weren't just missing. They'd been pulled into something organized and relentless. Why am I still here? I whispered, voice barely audible over the buzzing light. My hand shook so badly I dropped a notebook. The thud echoed, loud in the confined space. Then, footsteps. Slow. Measured. From the shadows at the far end of the room, a figure emerged, face obscured beneath a hood. No words, just a tilt of the head, as if questioning my presence. I took a step back, heart lodged in my throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but the stairwell behind me seemed miles away. "Who are you?" I said, voice firmer than I felt. "What is all this?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they reached into their pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. They tossed it onto the table and stepped closer. I unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, and scrawled in the same shaky handwriting I'd seen before. They don't just watch. They decide. And when you disappear, it's because they chose you. My stomach twisted. Chosen. For what? I glanced up, but the figure was already retreating, slipping back into the shadows. "Wait." I called, but the only reply was the flicker of screens and the buzz of the failing light. The door above suddenly slammed shut with a deafening bang. I spun around, heart pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst. The stairwell was gone, sealed tight. Panic clawed at my chest. Trapped. Completely trapped. The screens flickered back to life, faces and maps dancing in the dim light. The blinking red dot moved again, closer. Closer. And then, a new message flashed across the main screen: your choices have consequences. I sank to the floor, breath ragged, hands pressed over my mouth to stifle a scream. This wasn't about a hike anymore. This was about survival. About outsmarting something that had already planned for every step. Outside, the forest pressed against the windows, dark and patient. Inside, the machine waited. Watching. Judging. I wasn't just hunted. I was a piece on their board, and the game had only just begun. The sun was sinking behind the ridge by the time I stumbled onto the gravel road leading out of the forest. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and unsteady, but moving forward regardless. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something or someone to appear between the trees. The trail had swallowed so much time and sanity that the idea of safety felt foreign. Still, I wasn't sure I was safe even now. I tried to think back, retracing the last few days in my head. The signs, the cryptic warnings carved into bark, the hurried notes stuffed beneath stones, the barely legible scribbles on torn scraps of paper. All pointing to the same chilling truth, that someone, or some group, had been watching. Tracking every visitor, every step. And that those who vanished had simply been erased. It wasn't paranoia, not entirely. I had proof now, proof that the authorities or whoever they were had eyes everywhere on that trail. I kept remembering that one message scrawled in shaky handwriting. They see. They take. Don't trust the quiet. At the time, I'd laughed it off as a prank. Now, it felt like the last desperate plea of someone already gone. The gravel crunched under my boots, a sharp contrast to the soft, damp earth of the woods. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, but under that was something metallic, faint yet persistent, like rusted wire left out in the rain. I couldn't place it, and that unsettled me more than anything. Was it a scent meant to mark territory? A subtle warning? I stopped at a bend where the forest opened up to a clearing. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the faint sound of a dog barking miles away, probably from a distant farm. The sky was bleeding orange and purple, shadows stretching long and thin. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fabric rough against my skin, and tried to steady my breath. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, watching the horizon swallow the last light. My mind was buzzing, too many questions, too few answers. What had happened to the others? The ones who disappeared. I could still feel their absence, like a weight pressing down on the air around me. I tried to remember the face of the last person I'd met on the trail, a hiker with a worn backpack and tired eyes who'd warned me to turn back. "They're watching," she'd said in a low voice, glancing behind her like she expected someone to be chasing her. I didn't believe her at first, I admitted to myself, but maybe I should have. The road beneath my feet was empty now, but I could almost hear the faint static of a radio, or maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my phone had no signal. No bars, just that endless searching tone. I swallowed hard, the taste of bitter adrenaline thick on my tongue. I kept walking, every step a small victory. The forest was behind me, but the feeling of being watched lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I thought about the notes I'd collected along the way, folded scraps stuffed inside my jacket pocket. Each one a fragment of a hidden story, a warning, a cry for help. When I finally reached the ranger station at the trailhead, I hesitated outside the door. It was quiet, deserted. The windows were dusty, the paint chipped and peeling. I ran a hand along the rough wood of the doorframe and took a deep breath. Inside, the air was stale and cold, the faint hum of a flickering fluorescent light overhead. I pulled out my notes, spreading them on the cracked plastic table. I read them again, piecing together the names, dates, and cryptic messages. Some were signed with initials, others anonymous. But they all told the same story. Someone was watching, tracking, and those who disappeared were erased from everything. I sat there for a long time, the silence pressing in. My hands trembled as I folded the notes back up and slipped them into my pack. I thought about the people who'd been there before me, their fears echoing in the empty room. I thought about how easy it was to be swept away, to become a ghost in a place meant for adventure and peace. The night crept in slowly, the light from outside fading to a dull gray. I felt the weight of exhaustion settle over me, but underneath it was something sharper, determination. I couldn't let this be the end. Not for me, and not for those who vanished. I knew the trail would still be there tomorrow, with its quiet dangers and hidden eyes. But I also knew I had to tell someone. Whatever was watching, that shadow in the woods, it had to be exposed. I'd carry the signs, the warnings, the truth with me. Even if no one believed it at first. Before I left, I looked out the window one last time. The forest loomed, dark and silent. No movement. No sound except the whisper of the wind. I stepped outside, feeling the cool night air settle on my face. The stars blinked faintly above, distant and indifferent. My breath steamed in the chill, steady now. It was over. Or at least, it was over for me. But somewhere beneath those trees, the watchers remained. Quiet. Patient. Waiting for the next footsteps to follow. I walked to my car parked at the edge of the lot. The engine's hum was a small comfort, a promise of normalcy. I pulled onto the road, the headlights cutting through the dark, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to think ahead. I'd tell the story. Maybe no one would believe it. Maybe I'd be dismissed as another lost traveler spinning a tale of shadows. But I couldn't keep silent. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The forest was swallowed by night, endless and unknowable. But I was leaving it behind. Still, a part of me knew this wasn't just a hike gone wrong. It was a warning about how thin the line is between being seen and disappearing altogether. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark. And I was finally moving forward. Story 5, The Architect's Mansion, Warping Reality and Mind. I never imagined a house could make you question your own mind, but the Architect's Mansion did that, day by slow day. The first morning I woke up in the mansion, the air was cool and smelled faintly of damp plaster and old wood, nothing harsh, just the scent of years settling in. I remember the way the floor beneath my bare feet felt uneven, more than just creaking floorboards. The tiles in the hallway, arranged in a pattern that seemed off, shifted subtly under my gaze, like they were trying to bend away from straight lines. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just an old house, quirks included. Breakfast was a ritual I clung to. The kitchen was cramped compared to the rest of the mansion, a cramped box of white cabinets and chipped counters that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. I made coffee, the bitter aroma filling the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, grounding me. The old radio on the windowsill crackled with a late morning talk show. I sat at the small round table, spooning oatmeal slowly, watching the light shift across the peeling wallpaper. The angles of the walls never seemed right, and yet I couldn't quite say why. I told myself I was imagining things. Buildings are imperfect. That was the truth. But that day, as I finished eating, something caught my eye at a door at the end of the hall that I was certain hadn't been there the day before. It was narrow, almost too narrow to be practical, painted a dull gray that blended into the wall. I stared at it for a long moment, fingers tightening around the mug. No, that door had to be part of the original blueprint. I was sure of it. But I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe I was just tired. The migraines began subtly, a dull pressure behind my eyes that worsened as the day wore on. By evening, the pain was a sharp throb that pulsed with every breath. I sat in the living room, the worn velvet of the armchair rough beneath my palms. The walls seemed to lean in closer, their angles shifting in the dim light. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but when I opened them, the hallway outside stretched impossibly long, twisting to the left in a way that didn't match the floor plan I'd memorized. I blinked hard. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks. A noise broke the silence, a faint creak, like a hinge moving somewhere far away. I froze, listening. The house was supposed to be empty except for me. I told myself it was the settling wood again, or the wind brushing against the shutters. Yet the feeling of being watched crept in, not from any one direction, but everywhere at once. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my glass of water, the cool liquid burning my throat. I tried to call a friend that night but hesitated halfway through the number. The signal was patchy inside the mansion, and the line crackled with static. I ended the call before it connected, the silence that followed heavier than the migraine that throbbed relentlessly behind my temples. I felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Sleep came in fits. The mattress was too firm, the sheets cool against my skin, and outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. I dreamed of corridors folding over themselves, walls bending at impossible angles, and doors that led nowhere. Woke up with a dry mouth and a pounding head, the taste of iron lingering on my tongue. The house felt colder in the morning, the air stale, as if the walls had absorbed a night's worth of secrets. On my second day, I wandered the mansion's lower floors, trying to map the place in my mind. The library was my favorite room, floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with dusty books, the scent of old paper and leather binding thick in the still air. The carpet was threadbare, soft underfoot, but the ceiling seemed lower than it should have been. I ran my fingers along a railing lining the mezzanine and felt the wood shiver beneath my touch. I could swear the staircase shifted slightly as I looked away. I found myself talking aloud more than usual. "It's just a house," I told the empty room. "Old. Quirky. Nothing more." The words sounded hollow. I was alone, yes, but not quite lonely yet. Or maybe I was, and just didn't want to admit it. My voice echoed back at me, warped by the strange angles of the room, fragments of my own sentences chasing themselves around the corners. By late afternoon, I noticed that the light bulbs flickered unpredictably, once in the kitchen, then again by the front entrance. I changed the bulbs, but the new ones fluttered just the same, as if the wiring itself was failing or something worse. I stood on a rickety stool, tightening a loose bulb, and caught my reflection in the window. The person staring back looked tired, pale, shadows under their eyes deeper than the night. Later, I found the narrow door again, this time, fully aware of its presence. It was locked, but there was no visible handle, just a small keyhole too high for me to reach easily. I pressed my palm against the cool wood, trying to feel for any hint of what lay beyond. The door didn't respond. I stepped back, the room seeming to tilt ever so slightly, and I had to grip the edge of a table to steady myself. That night, the migraines hit with a vengeance. I paced the floor, the rough plaster walls pressing in, the uneven floor tilting beneath my steps. The nausea came in waves, and my vision blurred at the edges. I curled up on the sofa, the fabric coarse against my cheek, and tried to shut out the house's subtle distortions. But even in the dark, the angles twisted, and the silence was heavy, thick enough to choke on. I knew I should call someone. Anyone. But the phone sat on the desk, screen dark, untouched. The thought of stepping outside, into the cold night air, felt like crossing a vast, unknowable gulf. I kept telling myself it was just the house. Just the migraines. Just the exhaustion. But something was wrong. Something about the way the walls leaned, the way the floors seemed less solid than memory said they should. As I lay there, the faint sound of footsteps echoed somewhere above me, soft, deliberate. I held my breath. Silence. Complete silence. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to will the pounding out of my head. Tomorrow, I promised myself I would leave. Just for a while. Get fresh air. Reset. Because this place was starting to feel like a trap, a maze with no exit, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my grip on what was real. The architect's mansion was no longer just a building. It was something else entirely. And I was beginning to understand that whatever it wasn't done with me yet. The footsteps didn't come again. I waited, breath shallow, ear straining until the silence became a kind of weight so thick it pressed against my chest. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just the house settling or an animal outside. But the house didn't settle like this. Not here. Not in this place where angles folded in on themselves like a bad trick of the eye. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the sofa, the coarse fabric scratching my skin through the thin cotton of my shirt. The migraine throbbed relentlessly, each pulse a hammer against my skull. I tried to focus on the steady tick of the old clock on the mantelpiece, but even that seemed off too slow, or maybe too fast. I wasn't sure anymore. Time had started to feel slippery, like it could unravel at any moment. By dawn, the nausea had settled into a dull ache, but the fog in my head was worse. I dragged myself to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and poured a glass of water. The cold liquid tasted faintly metallic, and the room smelled faintly of damp wood and something else I couldn't place, like old paper left too long in a drawer. I sat at the kitchen table, the rough grain digging into my palms, and tried to think. The house was a puzzle I hadn't finished solving, and every corner I turned only revealed more confusion. The crooked hallway outside the living room curved sharply to the left, but when I glanced down it again, it didn't look quite the same as it had the night before. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. I could swear the door at the end was narrower. I knew I had to map it out, to make sense of the place before it swallowed me whole. But where to start? I didn't have a notebook or even a pen, just a crumpled receipt from a grocery store shoved in my pocket. I unfolded it and scribbled some rough notes, my handwriting shaking. I wrote down the odd things I'd noticed, the angles, the shifting walls, the way the floors slanted just enough to make you think you'd lost your balance. There was something else, too. I couldn't ignore it any longer, a faint tapping sound that seemed to come from inside the walls. Like a heartbeat. Steady at first, then erratic, as if someone was knocking in Morse code. I pressed my ear to the plaster, but it stopped the moment I listened closely. I tried again, waiting, but the silence returned, thick and immovable. Later that morning, I decided to explore the upper floors despite the pounding in my head. The staircase was narrower than it appeared from below. The steps sloped unevenly, and the handrail felt sticky under my fingers, coated with an old varnish that smelled faintly of turpentine. The air was colder up there, stale and slightly musty, as if the rooms hadn't been opened in years. I passed a door that was cracked open, revealing a dim room filled with dusty furniture draped in white sheets. The shapes beneath the fabric looked like ghosts frozen in place, and a shiver ran down my spine. I forced myself to look away and pressed on. At the end of the hallway, I found a small office. The door was locked, but the lock wasn't sturdy, just an old brass latch. I jiggled it, and it gave way with a soft click. Inside, the air, cold and heavy with silence, smelled of old paper and ink. Shelves lined the walls, packed with architectural drawings and faded blueprints. I picked up a rolled sketch tied with a yellowed ribbon and carefully unrolled it on the desk. The lines on the paper twisted and folded in ways that didn't make sense. Rooms that led into other rooms without doors, staircases that looped back on themselves, hallways that bent at impossible angles. I ran my finger along one corridor that seemed to spiral inward, dizzying and disorienting. The architect must have been obsessed, or something else entirely. As I studied the drawings, I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned quickly, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. The door was still open, swaying slightly on its hinges. I closed it, pressing my back against it, trying to steady my breath. I sat there for a moment, head resting against the cool wood, and decided I needed help. Not just anyone, I needed someone who understood this kind of madness, someone who could see past the angles and the shifting walls and help me figure out what was going on. I thought of Lucy, my neighbor a few blocks away. She was a writer, always curious about strange old houses and local legends, even if she didn't believe in ghosts. Maybe she could help. Or at least listen. I pulled out my phone, but the screen stayed stubbornly black. No signal. No power. I'd forgotten to charge it last night in the chaos. The realization hit me like a cold wave. If the house was cutting me off, isolating me, then I was truly alone. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. I paced again, the uneven floor tilting beneath my feet, the migraine flaring back to life. I pressed my palms to my temples and sank down onto the floor, swallowing the nausea. Then I heard it. A soft voice, almost a whisper, coming from the hallway outside the office. "Hello?" I froze. The voice was female, low and hesitant. Not quite a whisper, but not loud enough to be sure. I strained to listen, but the silence swallowed the sound as quickly as it came. "Is someone there?" I called out, voice shaking. No answer. Just the quiet groan of the house settling, or maybe shifting again. I stood, heart racing, and edged toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, the air thick and still. The crooked angle stretched before me, walls leaning in as if watching. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was tired, that the house was playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. Shadows clung to the corners of the old estate as if whispering secrets meant to unravel anyone daring enough to listen. A faint smudge on the wall, too deliberate to be a stain. A handprint pressed into the plaster, smeared and awkwardly shaped, like someone had tried to grip the wall and slipped. My hands trembled as I reached out, fingertips brushing the rough surface. The plaster felt cool and damp beneath my fingers. I stepped back, the nausea twisting in my stomach. I wasn't alone in this house. And whatever was here wasn't done with me yet. I blinked again, trying to force the shape into focus. The hallway outside the office wasn't empty after all. There, half hidden behind the doorframe, was a small, crumpled slip of paper pinned under a crooked nail. I didn't remember seeing it before. The afternoon light caught the edges, yellowed and brittle. My fingers trembled as I reached out, but the migraine squeezed tighter, like a fist clenching my skull. I swallowed hard and grabbed the note. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, unfamiliar. "You're not meant to find this. The house watches." The words didn't make sense. What house? The walls? I looked up, heart thudding. The crooked corridor stretched beyond, narrowing and bending until it disappeared into a shadow that felt too dense, too deliberate. The air smelled faintly of damp plaster and something else, a sharp, metallic tang that set my teeth on edge. I stuffed the note into my pocket and staggered back inside the office. That whisper wasn't just my imagination. Someone had been here, or was still here. The thought sent a cold pulse through my veins. I sat down heavily at the desk. The migraine blazed anew, hot and relentless, squeezing the edges of my vision until the room warped and twisted. The architecture was a trap, every angle wrong, every corner a distortion. Even the floor beneath me felt unstable, tilting imperceptibly, as if the house itself was breathing beneath my feet. I rubbed my temples, trying to steady my thoughts. The nausea churned in my stomach, and the smell, the metallic scent, lingered, mixing with the mustiness of old wood and plaster dust. I told myself to calm down. I needed clarity. But the house refused. From the far end of the hall came the faint scrape of footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not mine. My breath caught. I strained to listen, but the walls seemed to absorb the sound, leaving only a faint echo, like a whisper trapped in cotton. "Who's there?" My voice was steadier than I expected, but the silence that followed was thick, pressing. I stood, hands shaking, and moved toward the hallway. The crooked walls leaned in closer, their angles unnatural. I felt trapped in a narrowing tunnel, the space shrinking. My footsteps echoed unevenly, the sound bouncing between walls that refused to align. I stumbled slightly, the nausea rising again. The house was a maze, but I wasn't lost yet. Not completely. I reached the spot where I'd seen the note. The nail was still there, but the paper was gone. My pulse quickened. Someone had taken it. Or maybe I had imagined it. No, I hadn't. I was sure. The corridor stretched ahead, folding in on itself in ways that made no sense. I pressed a hand against the peeling wallpaper, its rough texture grounding me. A draft whispered past, cold and sudden, carrying with it the faintest hint of cigarette smoke and old sweat. Human presence. Not ghosts. People. My mind reeled. If someone was here, watching, waiting, what did they want? I forced myself to move forward, each step feeling heavier. The walls seemed to close tighter, the angle sharper, the ceiling lower. My head throbbed fiercely, and the room spun just enough to make me catch the wall to steady myself. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a dim glow flickered like a candle, maybe a lantern. I could hear muted voices, too quiet to understand, but distinct. 2, maybe 3 people. I backed away, heart hammering. Escape felt urgent, but the owls had other plans. The hallway behind me had shifted. The corridor I'd taken to get here had disappeared, replaced by a blank wall. I turned back, panic rising. The wall seemed to pulse, breathing in and out like a living thing. I was trapped. No way back. No escape. The voices grew louder, closer. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible, but my hand shook so hard I nearly gave myself away. The metallic scent was stronger here, acrid and sharp. It filled my nostrils, making me gag. Then, a voice from the doorway. Come out. We know you're there. Calm. Controlled. But with an edge that set my blood cold. I swallowed hard. Who? My voice cracked. Not here to hurt you. Just to talk. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe so badly. But the house was a cage. The warped walls, the shifting corridors, the impossible angles, they weren't accidental. They were designed to disorient, to trap. I realized then, with a sinking, terrible clarity, that I had crossed a line. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was prey. Please, I said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't want trouble. Neither do we, the voice answered. But you can't leave. Not yet. The door creaked open wider, light spilling into the hallway. Shadows moved, indistinct shapes emerging from the gloom. I could see faces now, pale, watchful, tired. One stepped forward, a woman with sharp eyes and a tight jaw. You've been here too long. I swallowed, nausea twisting my guts. I didn't know anyone else was. No one comes here by accident, she said, voice low. Not anymore. I wanted to ask what she meant, but a sudden dizziness swept over me, and I grabbed the wall to steady myself. The migraine slammed into me like a hammer, and the nausea hit full force. You have to understand, she said, stepping closer, this house isn't just architecture. It's a system. A trap. And you're inside it now. Her words echoed in my head, matching the cold certainty settling in my chest. The warped hallways. The shifting walls. The impossible angles. It wasn't madness. My mind raced with possibilities. It was method. I was caught. No way out. The woman's eyes searched mine. This isn't the first time someone's tried to leave. It won't be the last. I swallowed again, dry and bitter. The house wasn't just a building. It was a prison. And I was its newest prisoner. The corridor behind her shifted again, walls bending and folding like wet paper. The space contracted, closing in with a slow, deliberate inevitability. I stepped back, but the woman's voice stopped me. "Don't try to run. You won't get far." I looked around desperately, the migraine making my vision swim. The hallways twisted tighter, the ceiling lowering like a trapdoor. I was trapped. No escape. No turning back. The owls had claimed me. And the people inside it, whoever they were, weren't going to let me go. The woman's words settled in the stale air like a weight I couldn't shrug off. This isn't the first time someone's tried to leave. It won't be the last. She looked at me like I was a mistake, or maybe a curiosity, something she'd seen before and never quite understood. My fingers still pressed against the peeling plaster of the wall, cool and rough beneath my skin, anchoring me as the migraine hammered behind my eyes. I swallowed hard, tasting the faint bitterness of old coffee lingering in my mouth, and tried to catch my breath. What is this place? I managed. My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She stepped back, folding her arms. The dim light from a flickering bulb overhead cast shadows that bent unnaturally along the warped hallway. You think it's just a house. But it's a machine. Designed to confuse. To trap. Her eyes didn't waver. You can't fight it by logic or strength. You have to understand how it works. I wanted to argue, to say none of this made sense, that the distorted angles, the nausea, the headaches were just in my head. But I couldn't deny it anymore. The walls had shifted when I wasn't looking, the space between doors stretched impossibly. It was as if the mansion breathed, inhaling and exhaling, rearranging itself like a living puzzle. "Why?" I asked, voice trembling. "Who would do this?" She shook her head. "I don't know anymore. The architect is gone. Or maybe dead. Or maybe he never existed. But the house remains. And it feeds on people like you." Her expression softened just a fraction. "I've tried to leave. I thought I could outsmart it. But it's patient." A door creaked somewhere behind me, the sound distant but sharp against the quiet. My stomach clenched. I spun around, eyes darting down the corridor, but nothing moved. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "I'm not, like you," I said quickly, trying to find some footing, some reason to hold on to. "I don't belong here. I just wanted to understand the place." "Everyone thinks that at first," she said. "But this place doesn't care. It doesn't care who comes in, or why." She took a step closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "It doesn't want you to leave." "Not really." I glanced down at my hands. They were shaking now, fingers twitching involuntarily. The migraine's pulse was relentless, each beat a sharp stab behind my temples. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the nausea that made my stomach lurch. "Is there a way out?" My voice was barely audible. The woman hesitated, then shook her head. "Not a real one. You can wander forever, chasing exits that vanish when you get close. Or you can try to understand the system, the patterns, the shapes. But even then, it's a game of chance. And the house always cheats." The wall seemed to move again, subtly at first, shifting the angles so the hallway narrowed and stretched impossibly. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall, breath rasping in my throat. The plaster felt like sandpaper under my palm. "Show me," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "If there's any hope, I want to see it." Her eyes flicked toward the darkness at the end of the hall. "Follow me. But be warned, this won't be easy." We moved together into the gloom, the woman's footsteps silent on the worn floorboards. The air grew colder, carrying a stale odor like damp stone and decaying wood. I swallowed the sour taste in my mouth, trying to ignore the growing tightness in my chest. As we walked, the hallway twisted unnaturally, the ceiling dipping lower in places, then soaring impossibly high. The walls leaned inward, then bulged outward like the hull of some great ship. I kept my hand on the wall to steady myself, but even that felt unreliable, like the surface might dissolve beneath my fingers. "Look here," she said, stopping before a narrow doorway that seemed to flicker in and out of focus. "This is one of the key points. The house uses these thresholds to disorient you. You think you're going forward, but the space shifts, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely." I reached out tentatively, the air thick with a faint, metallic tang that made me wrinkle my nose. The door frame was cold, slick with some invisible film that made my skin crawl. I pulled back, heart pounding. "I don't understand how it does this," I said, voice low. "Is it some kind of trick? A mirror? A distortion?" She looked at me like I was missing something obvious. "It's architecture, yes. But it's also psychology. The angles, the light, the sound, all designed to confuse your senses, to break your mind down. You start doubting what you see, what you feel, what you remember." A shudder ran through me, and I pressed my hand to my forehead. The migraine was a living thing now, throbbing with relentless insistence. The nausea was a tide rising, ready to drown me. I swallowed hard, tasting the dry bitterness again, the metallic aftertaste of fear. "Have you seen others?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "People who got trapped?" She nodded. "Yes. Some lose their minds. Others disappear. Sometimes you find pieces of them, notes, scraps of clothing. But the house never gives them back." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What about you? How long have you been here?" She hesitated, eyes flicking away. "Longer than I should have. Maybe too long." I wanted to press her, to ask more, but the sudden creak of a floorboard somewhere behind us made me spin on my heel. The hallway behind us was empty, but the sound lingered, sharp and accusing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, face tight with tension. "You're not alone." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. The house wasn't empty. The air felt heavier that morning, like the house was holding its breath. I woke up on the floor, which wasn't exactly unusual anymore, but the ache in my neck told me I hadn't landed gently. The faint throb behind my eyes sharpened immediately, like a dull hammer tapping somewhere inside my skull, refusing to stop. I forced myself to sit up, the uneven boards pressing into my back through the thin blanket. The architect's mansion didn't care if I was comfortable. It never had. I blinked against the weak light slipping in through the cracked window. Shadows pulled unevenly in the corners, twisting the room's angles into something unrecognizable. I had walked this hallway a dozen times, but today it felt like I was seeing it for the first time, an impossible geometry, like the walls were closing in and receding all at once. My stomach turned, cold sweat prickling at my temples. I swallowed hard, tasting nothing but stale dust and the faint metallic tang of tension. I stood, hands pressed against the rough plaster wall, grounding myself. The texture was harsh and brittle under my fingertips, fragments crumbling like dry earth. I had to move. Staying still only made the nausea worse, and the migraines worse still. But where? Every turn led to more confusion. Doorways that should have opened to familiar rooms instead twisted into endless corridors. I knew the house wasn't changing, it was me. Or maybe both. The screen door rattled somewhere outside, a soft but persistent sound that made me flinch. I strained to listen. No footsteps followed. just the wind teasing the old hinges and the distant bark of a dog. The world beyond these warped walls was still out there, normal and unyielding. But I was trapped. I stumbled toward the kitchen, hoping to find water or something that might settle the storm inside me. The cabinets hung at odd angles, like they'd been installed by someone who'd mixed up the blueprints. I opened the fridge, the light flickering unevenly. A half-empty bottle of mineral water sat on the shelf. I grabbed it, hands trembling, and took slow sips. The cold liquid bit at my throat, but at least it was something real. What am I doing here? I muttered aloud, the sound catching me off guard. The voice felt foreign, thin and fragile, echoing against the warped walls. I hadn't spoken in hours, maybe days. The isolation was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out to call someone, anyone. The phone didn't work. The signal was dead. The architect's mansion was a cage, a puzzle with no solution. I moved back into the hallway, limping slightly from the dull pain in my ankle. I hadn't noticed when I twisted it, but it throbbed sharply with every step. I paused, pressing a palm to the wall, the plaster cool but crumbly beneath my fingers. The hallway stretched before me, endless and uncertain. I tried to recall the layout, a mental map I'd drawn over weeks of wandering. But the lines were smudged, the shapes distorted. The house was winning. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Behind me. My breath caught. I froze. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Complete silence. I wanted to turn, to face whoever or whatever was there. But my body betrayed me, stiff and trembling. The migraine twisted into something sharper, a vice squeezing my skull. I closed my eyes, willing it to pass. When I opened them, the hallway was empty. No one. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, the owls playing tricks on my fraying mind. But the smell lingered, a faint trace of cologne, sharp and unfamiliar. It wasn't me. Someone else was here. Or had been. Panic rose, raw and unfiltered, but I swallowed it back. I wasn't going to let the place break me. Not completely. I moved faster, limping toward the front door, the warped floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The door was supposed to be locked, bolted from the inside. But when I reached it, the latch was loose, swinging slightly on its hinges. A draft slipped in, carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. I pushed the door open with a cautious hand. Outside, the world breathed again. The sky was a pale gray, the clouds heavy and low. The trees swayed gently, their branches rubbing softly against each other. I stepped onto the porch, the boards cold and slick with moisture. The nausea still churned, but the fresh air was a balm. I looked back at the house. The windows stared like blank eyes, the angles sharp and cruel. The mansion had held me captive for too long. But here, outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, possibility. I sat on the porch steps, hands folded in my lap, and let the rain begin. It was gentle at first, then steady, soaking through my clothes and cooling the fever burning in my skin. The sky darkened as the storm moved in, but I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the rain patter against the wooden porch, to the distant rumble of thunder, to the steady beat of my own breathing. I thought about the footprints behind me, the faint cologne, the feeling of being watched. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts or spirits. It was haunted by something much more human, secrets, memories, the weight of isolation. I wasn't alone in that. I never had been. The migraines, the nausea, the endless corridors, they weren't just tricks of the mind. They were symptoms. The house was a reflection of my unraveling. But sitting there in the rain, I realized I didn't have to let it consume me. I could leave. I could walk away. I stood slowly, the cold rain stinging my face, and turned my back on the mansion. The door creaked behind me, the sound final and resolute. The impossible angles, the warped hallways, they were no longer my prison. I stepped off the porch and onto the muddy path leading away from the architect's mansion. The nausea still lingered, the migraine pulsed faintly, but I was moving forward. One step at a time. And that was enough. Story 6, Eastbrook Crossing, a town out of sync. It was the kind of morning that smelled like damp concrete and crushed leaves, sharp with the faintest bite of coming frost. I should have stuck to the main road. The air was still cool enough to fog my breath, and I tugged the collar of my jacket up as I stepped onto the first plank. The bridge swayed gently underfoot, a slow pendulum moving with the breeze, the river below murmuring secrets I didn't want to hear. I tried not to look down. I never liked heights, even on something as pedestrian as this. Halfway across, I noticed something odd. The sign at the far end, the one that usually read "Welcome to Eastwood," was different. Not the usual green with white lettering, but a faded blue sign that said Eastbrook. I blinked, stepping back, the wood creaking beneath me as the bridge shifted again. The river smelled sharper here, like iron and damp earth. I told myself it was just the light playing tricks. The morning sun peeked through the bare branches, casting uneven shadows that made everything look off-kilter. Probably some municipal mix-up, or they'd swapped signs for maintenance. That made sense. It had to. By the time I reached the other side, my fingers were numb, and the soles of my boots left faint wet prints on the cracked pavement. I scanned the street, expecting the usual faces, a few early risers, the barista at the bakery setting out chairs, Mr. Jensen watering his front garden. But the street was quieter than usual. Too quiet. I passed a woman standing outside a corner store, her eyes flicking past me, unseeing. She was humming something, a soft tune I almost recognized but couldn't place. When I tried to catch her attention to ask for directions, she turned her head sharply, her lips tightening, and muttered, "You're not from here." Her words hung in the air like a warning. I frowned and kept walking, the uneven sidewalk pressing into the soles of my shoes. The air smelled of stale coffee and something like burnt toast. I passed a man sitting on a bench, his gaze fixed on a worn paperback. I nodded politely, but he didn't look up. When I said good morning, his eyes stayed glued to the pages, and his lips moved as if he was mouthing words to himself, not reading aloud, but reciting. It gave me the creeps. I told myself to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired. The last few weeks had been a blur, long shifts, little sleep, and a constant background hum of unease I couldn't quite place. But this felt different. Like I'd stepped into someone else's world, one that mirrored my own but was just out of sync. I found the cafe, a small brick building with faded white paint flaking off the window frames, just as I remembered. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open, the rich aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon greeting me like old friends. For a moment, relief washed over me. Here, at least, things felt normal. That's when I saw Claire behind the counter. She looked up, paused, her smile faltering. "You again?" she said, voice low, uncertain. "Do I know you?" I blinked. "I work here," I said, hoping I sounded steadier than I felt. She shook her head, brows knitting together. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. This is Eastbrook. You're not from here." The words hit me like cold rain. I stepped back, the floor seeming to tilt beneath me. "No, I'm sure." "Do you want me to call someone?" she offered, voice softer now. I swallowed, the taste of metal rising in my mouth, and shook my head. "No. I just..." I think I took the wrong way crossing the bridge. Claire's eyes narrowed, searching mine. You didn't cross the bridge at all today. I looked down at my shoes, at the dampness clinging to the leather. The scent of damp earth was stronger here, heavier. My throat tightened. I did, I insisted, though a part of me hesitated. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes and sending a shiver down my spine. The cafe's warmth felt suddenly fragile, like a thin barrier against something unseen pressing in. I noticed then how quiet it was outside, how no one passed the windows, how the usual morning bustle had vanished. I left the cafe with the same shaking certainty that I was losing my grip on reality. The bridge, the signs, the faces, they were all wrong. But if I hadn't crossed it today, then where had I been? The streetlights flickered as dusk edged closer, and a distant dog barked twice before falling silent. Silence. Complete silence. I looked back toward the bridge, its silhouette dark and trembling against the gray sky. I had to cross it again. Because if I didn't, I might never find my way back. With hesitant steps, I approached the bridge once more, each footfall echoing louder than the last in the growing quiet. The air thickened, a cold mist curling around my ankles as if trying to pull me back. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered warnings I couldn't ignore, yet the compulsion to cross burned brighter than fear. Halfway across, the world seemed to warp, the distant city lights blurred, and shadows stretched impossibly long. I clenched my fists, forcing myself forward, desperate to reclaim the reality that felt just beyond reach. A sudden flicker of movement caught my eye, something watching, waiting in the gloom. The night air hung heavier than before, thick with that damp, metallic scent that always seems to gather near old iron and rust. I didn't move for a long moment. The world around me shifted again, subtle but undeniable. The street lamps on the far side blinked out one by one, plunging the far end of the bridge into darkness. No cars passed. No footsteps echoed. Just silence, save for the distant, low growl of the river beneath. It sounded angry tonight, as if the water itself was warning me to turn back. But I didn't. I crossed. The second time, the distortion was worse. The signs had all changed. Not just misplaced, but different altogether. Maple Street became Marble Street. A storefront I recognized as the old bakery was now a dusty flower shop, the window empty except for a single wilted rose. A man in a gray jacket passed me, nodding vaguely, but his eyes were blank, like he was searching for someone else entirely. I stopped him. "Excuse me, do you know where the bakery is?" He blinked, his gaze flickering with confusion. "Bakery? No, sorry. Flower shops closed for the night." His hesitation twisted something cold in my chest. I glanced down at myself. My jeans were the same, my jacket the same, but my hands, they felt strange. Thinner, almost numb. I rubbed them together, trying to chase away the odd sensation, but it lingered. I kept walking. The houses looked familiar but wrong. One porch light burned blue instead of yellow. Another had a swing set that wasn't there before, its chains rusted and creaking softly in the wind. I passed a group of teenagers leaning against a wall, laughing quietly. Their faces blurred when I looked directly at them, as if my eyes couldn't quite focus on their features. I wanted to ask them something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. A second man approached, a woman this time, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "You don't live here," she said flatly, not a question. "Why are you here?" I frowned. "I live just across the bridge." She shook her head slowly. "No, you don't. You wouldn't be asking." Her voice was calm but edged with something like suspicion, like I was a stranger trespassing in a neighborhood that didn't want me. I swallowed again, this time thicker. I'm just trying to get home." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded sharply as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble and walked away without another word. I stood there, the cold settling into my bones. The streetlights flickered again, casting long, ropey shadows that stretched toward me like fingers. The air tasted faintly of decay, something rotten buried beneath the pavement. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the creeping unease. I had to find a clue. Something concrete. My steps took me toward the small park at the end of the street, the one I remembered from childhood, with its cracked benches and faded playground. Except tonight, it was overgrown. Tall weeds choked the paths, and the swings hummed still, the chains silent and thick with cobwebs. A thin fog curled low around the grass, softening the edges of the world. I crouched near the base of an old oak tree, fingers tracing the rough bark. Then I saw it. A scrap of paper pinned beneath a jagged nail, fluttering weakly in the breeze. I pulled it loose, careful not to tear the brittle edges. It was a note. The handwriting was shaky and hurried. "Do not trust the bridge." No signature. No explanation. My hands trembled as I folded the note and stuffed it into my pocket. I looked back across the bridge, its cables groaning in the night wind, the far side swallowed in shadows that seemed to pulse and breathe. Something was wrong here. Worse than I'd imagined. I needed answers. But who could I trust? The people on the other side didn't recognize me. I didn't recognize myself. The thought made my stomach twist. I made my way back, crossing the bridge again. The world shifted yet again, but this time something else changed. The movement I'd seen earlier was closer now. Not a shadow, but a figure. Standing just on the edge of the light, watching. I stopped. My breath caught. "Who's there?" I called, voice barely above a whisper. No reply. Just the distant howl of the river and the creaking bridge. I stepped forward. The figure didn't move. Closer now. I could see the outline of a man, tall, thin, and impossibly still. His face was hidden beneath a hood. Then the street lamp flickered violently and went out. Darkness enveloped us. My heart hammered louder than the river's roar. I took a step back and nearly stumbled over something lying on the ground. A phone. Screen cracked, but still glowing faintly. I picked it up. The screen displayed a photo. Me. But not the me I knew. A version of me with hollow eyes and a grim expression, standing on the bridge, staring back. Cold fingers of dread wrapped around my chest. I slid the phone into my pocket and didn't look back as I hurried across the bridge once more. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about a shift in geography or memory. It was something deeper. Something waiting for me to cross again and again. The bridge wasn't just a boundary between two places. It was a gateway between who I was and who I was becoming. And I wasn't sure which side I wanted to be on. The river's roar was still hammering in my ears when I stepped off the bridge, but something had shifted. I slid the phone back in, fingers numb, and looked up. The street lamp that had gone out was now flickering erratically, struggling against the darkness like it knew it was losing a fight. I hesitated, breath puffing in white clouds, the cold biting through my jacket. I wanted to turn back, to cross the bridge again and return to the side I thought I belonged to. But the feeling that something had caught me, hooked me, was too strong. Like sinking into quicksand, the more I fought, the deeper I sank. I took a step forward. The street ahead was quieter than it should have been. No cars passed. No distant voices. Just the occasional drip of water from the eaves and the faint rustle of dead leaves skittering across cracked pavement. The air smelled faintly of wet concrete and something else metallic, like blood or rust. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the nausea that crept up my throat. There was a man standing in the shadows across the street. Not the hooded figure from the bridge, this one was shorter, stockier, and his face was lit by the dull glow of a cigarette. He didn't look at me. Instead, he stared down the empty street, as if waiting for someone. I wanted to cross over and ask him if he'd seen the man on the bridge, but a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Something about the way he held himself, too still, too patient, felt wrong. I turned down the street instead, hoping to lose him in the maze of alleys and side roads. The buildings leaned in close, their cracked plaster walls smelling of mildew and something sour beneath. A stray dog barked once, then retreated into the shadows. I forced my legs to keep moving, each step heavier than the last, as if my body was resisting some invisible force. The phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I yanked it out, heart jumping. A new message. No sender, just a line of text. You can't go back. My fingers went cold. I stared at the screen, willing it to make sense. Was this some cruel joke? A prank? But the photo from before, the faces that didn't recognize me, the way the world had tilted, none of it felt like coincidence anymore. I shoved the phone into my jacket and pressed on. The street narrowed, the buildings closing in like a vice. Windows stared down at me like empty eyes, some cracked, some boarded up. I passed a small convenience store, its door hanging open, flickering neon sign buzzing weakly. Inside, the shelves were half empty, but there were footprints in the dust. Fresh, as if someone had just been there. Then I heard it. Whispering. Faint. Almost drowned by the hum of the neon and the distant river. I stopped, heart thudding, trying to catch the words. It didn't sound like a language I knew, but it was definitely human. The voice came from somewhere inside the store. I should have run. I should have turned around and crossed back over the bridge while I still could. But my feet moved of their own accord, dragging me forward into the gloom. The interior was a mess. Broken glass glittered on the floor, and the air, cold and heavy with silence, was thick with dust and something acrid like burnt plastic. The whispering was louder now, coming from behind the counter where an old cash register sat, rusted shut. I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal. The whisper stopped instantly. Silence. Complete silence. Then a voice, low and calm, broke through the stillness. You're here because you crossed. I spun around. No one was there. The street outside was empty, the neon sign flickering with a dull blue pulse. My breath came out in short gasps, and I wiped sweat from my brow, even though the air was cold. Who's there? I asked, voice cracking. No answer. I backed out of the store, hands shaking. The street lamp outside buzzed erratically again, and I realized the shadows were moving. Not just the flickering light playing tricks. Real movement. Figures stepping out of doorways, leaning from behind cars, slipping through alleys. And none of them looked at me. None of them acknowledged I was there. It was like I was invisible. Or a ghost. I started walking faster, head swiveling at every sound, every movement. The bridge behind me was a block away, but the street felt endless, as if the world had stretched and warped in the dark. I stopped at a corner and pulled out the phone again. Another message. There's no going back. Not now. I clenched my jaw, fingers tightening around the device until it ached. What did that mean? Why couldn't I leave? The old bridge had been a crossing point, yes, but now it felt more like a trap. I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, light, deliberate. I didn't dare look back. Hey, a voice called softly. I froze. The voice was familiar, warm, almost gentle. Like a memory I couldn't quite place. Wait, the voice said again. We need to talk. I risked a glance. A woman stood a few feet away, her face half hidden in shadows, eyes sharp but not unkind. She was dressed like someone who'd been outside all day, wrinkled jacket, scuffed shoes, but there was something urgent in her stance. Who are you? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She took a cautious step closer. You don't belong here anymore. Not like this. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I shook my head. I don't understand. I crossed the bridge, yes, but I'm me. I'm the same person I was yesterday. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. That's the problem. You're not. I swallowed hard, the cold creeping deeper into my bones. Explain. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. There's a line you crossed. It's not just geography. It's time. Identity. Every crossing changes you. And once you've changed, the world on this side doesn't recognize the old you. And the old you can't come back. I shook my head again, disbelief knotting my chest. That can't be true. She stepped forward, voice low but steady. Look around. The faces, the places, they're all off. People don't remember you. You feel like a stranger in your own skin. That's because you are. The words hit me like a punch. I staggered back, mind racing. I looked down at my hands, searching for something familiar. The skin was pale, almost translucent under the street lamp's flicker. My nails were bitten raw. My fingers trembled. Why? I whispered, voice cracking. Why me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled something from her pocket, a small, folded piece of paper, and pressed it into my hand. Because you saw it, she said simply. And once you see what's behind the surface, they don't want you crossing back. Not with that knowledge. I unfolded the paper with shaking fingers. The words were scrawled in hurried handwriting. They watch. They wait. Crossing isn't just moving. It's choosing. And once you choose, you're theirs. A chill ran down my spine. Who are they? Her eyes darkened. People like you. People who tried to understand. Who tried to fight it. But the world on the other side. It changes you. Controls you. And the bridge? It's the gatekeeper. I wanted to argue. To deny the creeping panic in my chest. But deep down, I knew she was right. The street lamp flickered once. The chill in the air wasn't just from the night. It had seeped into my bones, twisting itself around my ribs like a cold wire. Her words, "You're not the same," echoed in my mind louder than the creak of the old suspension bridge behind me. I backed away instinctively, my boots crunching on gravel unevenly, the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones thick and heavy in the quiet street. You don't belong here anymore. Not like this. She said it again, that certainty framing her face like a shadow. Her eyes held no warmth, only a sharp edge that sliced through the dim light. I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to push back against the idea that I was slipping into some unfamiliar version of myself, but my throat tightened. It felt like there was something lodged inside, a knot I couldn't untie. Then what am I supposed to do? I finally managed, voice rough and low. How do I fix this? She hesitated, then stepped closer. The scent of damp earth and faint smoke clung to her, mixed with something metallic like rusted iron or old blood. I blinked, trying to focus, but the street lamp above flickered, casting long, lurching shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. The noise of a distant dog barking fractured the silence, sharp and urgent. "You can't fix it." "Not really," she said. "The more you try, the worse it gets. The bridge's toll is your identity. Each crossing steals a piece, rearranges the pieces until the person you were disappears." I swallowed hard, tasting the bitter tang of fear on my tongue. My hands trembled even as I clenched them into fists, nails digging into skin. "That's impossible. I'm still me." "Are you?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it struck me like a shout. "You don't look the same. You don't act the same. The people you knew don't see you anymore. And you don't know who you are on this side." Her words weren't just a warning anymore. They were a verdict. Behind her, the street stretched out, a narrow corridor of dimly lit storefronts and shuttered windows. A car passed by slowly, its headlights cutting through the dark, but the driver's face was blurred, unrecognizable. I blinked again, and the car was gone. I glanced down at my own reflection in a broken puddle near the curb. The face staring back was mine, familiar, yes, but somehow wrong. The eyes held a strange distance, as if I were looking at someone else's sadness hiding behind my own skin. I touched my cheek, rough with stubble that wasn't there before, or maybe it was. I wasn't sure anymore. Why doesn't anyone remember me? My voice cracked. Why do I feel like a stranger? She looked away, jaw tight, then back again. Because the world you left remembers you differently than the one you crossed into. It's not just geography. It's history, memory, identity. The bridge isn't just a bridge, it's a boundary. You can't cross it without paying the price. I stepped back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The street seemed to tilt, the buildings leaning in as if to listen. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs were frozen. A sudden sound, a laugh, sharp and brittle, cut through the night behind me. I turned sharply, breath hitching. A group of people stood just beyond the flickering lamplight, faces half hidden in shadow. They were watching. Their eyes weren't hostile, but they weren't welcoming either. More like cautious, curious. Like I was a puzzle they didn't want to solve, but couldn't look away from. A young woman stepped forward, her smile tight, eyes scanning me as though trying to place a name that wouldn't come. "I don't know you," she said bluntly. "You shouldn't be here." I blinked, confused, heart sinking. "I live here." "No, you don't." Her voice was firm now, almost cold. "Not anymore. You crossed that bridge. That means something." I shook my head, desperate. "I'm the same person." "I'm not." "You don't get to say that." She cut me off. "Not here." The others moved closer, forming a loose circle. Their faces were familiar and unfamiliar all at once, like memories half remembered from a dream that slips away upon waking. "You've been warned," the first woman said. "This side doesn't want you. Not like this." The street lamp flickered again, then went out, plunging us into darkness thick and suffocating. A cold wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and something sour beneath them. I stumbled backward, hands outstretched, searching for something solid. The rough plaster of a nearby wall met my palm, cold and unforgiving. The group's voices murmured just beyond the edge of hearing, their words indistinct but urgent. My breath came in ragged gasps, the night pressing in on me like a weight. The bridge. I needed the bridge. I turned sharply, pushing through the darkness, my boots scraping against the uneven pavement. The bridge's cables loomed ahead, silhouetted against the moonlight, swaying slightly in the wind. But as I approached, I noticed something different. The bridge felt heavier, older. The boards creaked louder, the metal groaned beneath unseen strain. A thick fog began to curl around the supports, curling upward like smoke from a forgotten fire. The bridge creaked underfoot like an old throat clearing, each plank sighing beneath my weight. I could feel the rough wood pressing into the soles of my boots, damp and weathered by years of wind and rain. The air carried that faint, biting chill of early morning, but it wasn't the cold that made my skin prickle. It was the silence, too pungent, too thick, like the calm just before a storm, or worse, the quiet after something has gone terribly wrong. I hesitated halfway across. Below, the river moved sluggishly, swollen with recent rains, pulling at debris tangled in its grasp. The mist hovered just above the water, a thin, shifting veil that blurred the edges of the world. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of my own nerves, and pressed on. This time, it was different. The last few crossings had been troubling, misplaced signs, unfamiliar faces, a peculiar sense of displacement, but today, the shift felt absolute. When I climbed off the bridge, the world did not welcome me back. Instead, it pushed me away with cold indifference. I shuffled down the cracked pavement of the town's main street, the faded yellow lines curling like dead leaves beneath my feet. The shops were still shuttered, but the windows were marred with unfamiliar graffiti, sharp, aggressive lines that didn't belong here. I passed the old bakery, its paint peeling in thick layers, and something inside me clenched. The bell above the door didn't jingle when I brushed against it. No one was inside. No sign of the woman who used to wave at me from behind the counter. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cracking in the empty street. "Hello?" No answer. Only the distant, intermittent bark of a dog. The sound was hollow, echoing off the brick walls like a warning. I tried to remember what had brought me here. What had pulled me across that bridge again and again. Was it hope? Curiosity? Or something more desperate, a need to find the person I used to be, or maybe to find someone who still recognized me? "What's your name?" a voice said suddenly, low and sharp. I spun around. A man stood leaning against the corner of a building. He was tall, with dark hair falling into his eyes, but his expression was unreadable, like a question scratched into stone. I stopped. My own name felt strange on my tongue, as if it belonged to someone else. "It's me," I said, hoping that would be enough. He blinked, then shook his head. "No, you're not. You don't belong here. You never did." The words hit me like a slap, sharp and cold. I took a step back, heart thudding painfully against my ribs. "I don't understand," I whispered. He pushed off from a wall, his eyes lingering on me like he was trying to see through my skin. "You can't remember, can you? The other side doesn't keep people who don't fit." "Other side?" I echoed, confusion twisting inside me like a knot. "That bridge," he said, nodding toward the swaying cables behind me. "It's a border. Not just between two places, but between what was and what is. You crossed into a world that's not yours. And now, it's pushing you out." I glanced back at the bridge, its cables humming faintly in the wind. The realization sank in, slow and dreadful. Every crossing had chipped away at my identity, peeling back layers until I was barely a shadow of myself. The faces here, the streets, the smells, they were all wrong. I was wrong. But I had to ask. Why? Why me? He shrugged, a small, bitter smile flickering. "Because you tried to hold on. Because you didn't want to let go of your old life. But that world's gone. And so are you." The weight in my chest grew heavier, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I looked down at my hands, trembling. They were mine, but not quite. I felt like a stranger trapped in skin that no longer fit. Is there a way back? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He shook his head again, slower this time. No, not really. The bridge doesn't just move you across space, it moves you through time, memory, reality. Every step changes things. You can't undo that. I swallowed, tasting bitterness that wasn't just in my mouth. So I'm stuck. Not stuck, he corrected. Lost. But lost can be found. His words were a riddle, but they sparked something fragile inside me, hope, maybe. Or maybe just a stubborn refusal to disappear without a fight. I turned away from him and toward the bridge. The wind tugged at my jacket, cold and relentless. I thought about the person I'd been when I first set foot on those wooden planks, full of certainty, of plans. And now I was someone else entirely. Someone who had to rebuild from the fragments. I stepped onto the bridge again, feeling the familiar sway beneath my feet. This time, I didn't hesitate. The world might shift, the people might forget me, but I wasn't going to vanish. Halfway across, I stopped and looked back. The man had already disappeared into the fog, and the town was swallowed by silence once more. The bridge groaned, the cables humming a low, steady song. The mist curled around me like a cold breath, but I stood firm. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I'd find myself on the other side. But I knew I couldn't stay lost here, caught between worlds that weren't made for me. The river rushed beneath me, carrying away the past with its endless current. The wind whispered secrets I couldn't quite grasp. And I walked forward. When I reached the far side, the street was different but familiar in a way that made my chest ache. The signs were faded but readable. The faces were cautious but kind. A small cafe smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon. I paused at the door, the bell tinkling softly as I entered. The woman behind the counter looked up, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Welcome back," she said gently. I nodded, a smile trembling at the corners of my mouth. Maybe I was still me, after all. Not the same, not whole, but enough. The bridge was behind me now, a thin line between what was lost and what could be found. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet strength of belonging. Silence. Complete silence. Then, a breath. A beginning.